It begins with smoke, not the thick, sulfuric clouds of European cannon fire, but the acrid humming hiss of black powder igniting beneath a jade-colored sky. It's 1519 and Hernán Cortés has just set foot on the shores of the Yucatan. But what greets him is not a fractured alliance of warring city-states, nor a timid greeting masked by ritual. Instead, the Spanish are met with the thunder of fire lances, obsidian-tipped spears married to explosive fury, wielded by warriors clad in eagle feathers and blackened copper masks. History as we know it breaks apart right there. The age of conquest doesn't begin with a march into Tenochtitlán. It begins with retreat. What if, centuries earlier, the Aztecs, or more precisely their predecessors, had discovered the alchemy of saltpeter, charcoal, and sulfur? What if the formula for gunpowder, that singular catalytic secret that transformed East and West alike, had been born beneath the twin volcanoes of Popocatépetl and Iztaccíhuatl? The question isn't just technological, it's existential. Because gunpowder doesn't merely change how battles are fought. It rewrites what it means to hold power, to resist it, to fear it. But to understand how this alternate world unfurls, we have to wind the clock back further, long before the sails of Spain pierced the Atlantic, before Moctezuma, before the Mexica, before the fall. Imagine the Toltecs, the mysterious precursors to the Aztec civilization, building not only towering pyramids but experimenting with fire and rock in ways never recorded. They learned to harvest salt from the valley lakes, not only for flavor or sacrifice, but for its strange combustive properties. A shaman alchemist in Tula, half mystic, half metallurgist, mixes crushed volcanic stone with sulfur gathered from sacred calderas. When the mixture ignites violently, unpredictably, the fire gods are blamed. But curiosity is a powerful thing, even in the age of superstition. And so experimentation replaces ritual. Over generations, the recipe stabilizes. Not for bombs at first, but for signals, smoke trails in battle, ceremonial fire displays, perhaps even primitive mining tools. But it is during the final decades of Toltec decline, with their city fractured by war and drought, that desperation breeds innovation. Primitive cannons carved from hardwood and reinforced with copper bindings belch flame in the defense of their capital. The weapons are crude, short-ranged, prone to bursting, but effective. And so the secret spreads, preserved not in scrolls or manuscripts, but in oral memory, in myth. By the time the Mexica rise from the marshes of Lake Texcoco in the 14th century, the old knowledge is reborn, reframed, refined. They call it Tlachinoli, a Nahuatl word meaning both fire and water, and they treat it with reverence. Their priest-smiths become guardians of this volatile blend. Not mere craftsmen but sacred engineers. Ritual and science blur. Temples are built with channels for smoke. Statues are hollowed to house fire-spewing mouths. And deep beneath the heart of Tenochtitlan, the great temple is girded not just with skulls, but with thunder. As centuries pass, their use of gunpowder matures. The Aztec military, already a force of relentless discipline, becomes an industrial machine. Slingers are replaced with arquebusiers. Jaguar warriors don breastplates of hardened leather lined with powder pouches. War drums are timed to volleys. And yet the Aztecs never become a mirror of Europe. Their use of technology is always filtered through cosmology. Fire is divine, destruction is sacred, and war is never waged for conquest alone, but for balance. By 1500, the Valley of Mexico is no longer just a cultural empire. It is a fire-wrought fortress. Cannons, small and mobile, are mounted to reed rafts that patrol the lake. Watchtowers flash signals across vast distances, and every festival, every ritual to Huitzilopochtli or Tezcatlipoca is punctuated with controlled explosions that make even hardened warriors flinch. Then sails. The Spanish arrive with their steel, their horses, their arrogance, but they are late, terribly late. Their arquebuses, once the terror of the Old World, are matched, even surpassed, by the brutal efficiency of Aztec gunpowder. The conquistadors expect chaos. Instead, they find formation, ranks of warriors firing in waves, smoke trailing from obsidian-decorated barrels. A battlefield not of fear but calculation. In our timeline, Malintzin, or La Malinche, served as interpreter and key negotiator for Cortés, instrumental in turning Mesoamerican allies against the Aztecs. But here, the Tlaxcalans, traditional enemies of the Aztec Triple Alliance, are already subdued, or worse, annihilated, by the overwhelming force of the fire-wielding empire. There are no alliances to exploit, no divisions to widen, only a unified force, crackling with the hiss of fuses. The Spanish are forced to flee inland, licking wounds they were never supposed to receive. Their horses, terrified by explosions, bolt. Their armor proves useless against concentrated fire. And slowly, word travels back across the ocean. not of gold but of defeat. This moment fractures everything in Spain. Disbelief turns to rage. Charles V demands a second, larger expedition. But with each year that passes, the technological gap widens. Aztec engineers, reverse engineering Spanish cannons, begin building larger weapons of their own. Gunpowder ships patrol not only Lake Texcoco but reach as far as the Gulf. Trade routes are secured. Envoys are sent to Maya cities, to Tarascan fortresses, to Zapotec temples, not as conquerors, but as brothers in fire. And in Tenochtitlán, Montezuma does not die a prisoner. He becomes emperor of a new order, one that knows the West not through submission but through triumph. But triumph has a cost. The technology that once protected becomes desired. The sacred balance, fire and water, Tenochtitlán, begins to tilt. Some in the empire seek to use powder not only for defense but domination. Whole regions are brought to heel not through tribute, but with cannon fire. And slowly, the rituals that bound the gods to restraint fray beneath the weight of ambition. And across the Atlantic, Europe watches. They cannot allow a native empire to hold monopoly on the new world's riches, or its innovations. England, France, and Portugal begin dispatching fleets of their own. Not conquistadors this time, but diplomats, spies, and traders. Tenochtitlán becomes a paradox, both beacon and target. Its streets glitter with obsidian and sulfur smoke. Its walls echo with the hum of foreign tongues. What happens next reshapes the world, and yet beneath it all, a question burns. If the Aztecs discovered gunpowder before the Spanish, would they truly survive the world they forced to change? Smoke still lingers in the Gulf, thick and oily, clinging to the hulls of Spanish galleons limping back toward Cuba. Survivors whisper of gods with fire in their hands, of obsidian thundersticks and cannon-mounted canoes that glide like phantoms. They speak not with pride but shame. The myth of European supremacy has cracked, and across the Atlantic, kings and popes clench fists in fury. In Tenochtitlán, the sun rises crimson. Moctezuma stands on the great temple's upper platform, his gaze sweeping across the causeways and canals. Below, priests chant over lines of warriors, polishing gun barrels and hammering copper into shape. The scent of sulfur mingles with incense. This is no longer the empire he inherited. It is something older, yet entirely new, a fusion of ritual and reason, myth and metallurgy, and its heart beats to the rhythm of war. But Moctezuma knows that survival will demand more than victory. The empire must evolve, and evolution begins with knowledge. He summons the few Spanish captives who survived the first failed landing. They are not tortured. They are questioned, fed, observed. From their mouths, new words emerge. Artillery, fortress, navigación. Aztec scribes transcribe them in pictographs and phonemes. One man, a Basque sailor named Rui, offers drawings of European ships, maps of distant coasts, the structure of gun locks. He is terrified, but he talks, and from that talking something dangerous begins. Understanding. In the great workshop temples of Tlatelolco, Aztec engineers begin forging weapons beyond anything they've known. Bronze-laced cannons cast with jaguar motifs, long-range fire lances with rifled inner chambers, rotating fuse igniters. These are not copies of European designs, they are reinterpretations, and they bear the soul of the empire that made them. But as Aztec power grows, so does its reach, and with it, its shadow. To the south, the Maya kingdoms resist integration. They have their own sciences, their own gods, their own resentments. In our timeline, their independence was a slow erosion. Here it is abrupt. In the city of Copan, emissaries are burned alive when they demand submission to the Fire Empire. In retaliation, an entire valley is shelled for days. Temples collapse in a roar of thunder and obsidian statues crack under the weight of gunpowder bombardment. The message is clear: unity or ash. Within the Aztec priesthood, debates erupt. Some cry blasphemy, others declare it destiny. Moctezuma listens, but he no longer rules from behind incense screens. He walks among the blacksmiths, rides with the cannon crews, prays not only to Huitzilopochtli, god of war, but to the spirits of invention. In this new world, divinity itself is being rewritten, and then a ship arrives. But not from Spain. A French caravel, flagged in white and blue, drops anchor off the coast of Veracruz. Its envoy carries no cross, no sword, but scrolls. Letters addressed to the Honorable Emperor of the Mexica, stamped with the seal of Francis I inside. Offers, trade, knowledge exchange, a mutual alliance against Spain. It is the first taste of a future that the Aztecs never imagined. A world where Europeans compete for their favor, where the Empire of the Sun is not prey but power broker. Soon after, a Portuguese vessel follows, then one from the English crown. The Spanish monopoly shatters, but alliances breed complexity. Tenochtitlán begins to change. Markets fill with goods from across the ocean: silk, wine, gun oil, glass. New diseases too. Though not with the same devastating speed, the Aztecs, now aware of contagion, impose strict quarantine rituals on all foreigners. Steam houses are built into port cities. Healers wear copper masks. Not all are spared, but the nightmare of demographic collapse, of 90% population loss, never takes root. Still, change is never clean. Some nobles grow rich on trade, their estates guarded by powder-wielding mercenaries. Others bristle at the dilution of tradition. A rift forms, not between native and foreigner, but between two visions of the empire. One rooted in the past, one aimed at the stars, and Montezuma, he feels it in his bones. Power is no longer merely held, it is performed, brokered, exported. A new kind of empire is rising, imperial not just by force, but by gravity, and he knows he must choose its shape before someone else does. In 1523 a great council is called. Not just priests and warriors, but inventors, farmers, merchants, and emissaries from every province. It is unprecedented, and there in the great hall beneath a stone ceiling blackened with soot, Montezuma proposes a radical idea, not conquest, not tribute, but federation, a unification of allied cities under one banner, one trade network, one mutual defense pact, one shared arsenal of fire. It is not welcomed by all. Some accuse him of betrayal, of weakness, of inviting the foreign poison too deep into the empire's heart, but others, especially the younger warriors and newly armed provinces, see something else, a future. The vote is close, but the fire favors change, and so the Confederation of the Sun is born. Its reach expands rapidly. Tarascans join, swayed by the promise of protection from European intrusion. Zapotecs align next. Even Maya city-states begin trickling into the fold, not out of fear, but for access to the one thing now more valuable than gold: gunpowder. The Aztecs guard the formula still, but they license it, train others in its use, establish schools of war and innovation blending metallurgy with astronomy, cosmology with chemistry. Their engineers write in codices and blueprints. Their warriors chant hymns over artillery drills. The line between sacred and scientific vanishes, and Europe panics. Spain prepares a new invasion, this time not by sea, but from the south through Panama. A land assault supported by native auxiliaries promises less exposure to Aztec firepower. The goal is clear: destabilize the Confederation, assassinate Moctezuma, and reclaim the gold trail. But the Aztecs are ready. They've built roads now, gunpowder depots in mountain passes, signal towers across the isthmus. When the Spanish force emerges from the jungles of Darien, they are met not with scattered resistance, but with coordinated ambushes, cannons concealed beneath vines, muskets disguised as ceremonial staffs, even trained jaguars, armored and scarred, released into the chaos. It is not a battle, it is a rout. The Spanish are annihilated, their commanders captured. Moctezuma, now older, greets them not as a prisoner, but as a mirror. He tells them the truth, that conquest in any direction is a fire that always turns on its master. He sends them back, alive, shaken, bearing a message to Europe. The Fire Empire will not be conquered, but it is open for negotiation. And so the question returns, not to the past, but to us. What happens to a world where power flows from the jungles of Mesoamerica, not the courts of Europe, where the drums of empire beat to the sound of fuse and flame, not cross and crown, where the Aztecs, armed not only with prophecy, but with powder, redefine the destiny of continents? The fire did not die with the repelled invasion, it spread. Across the Atlantic, word of the Spanish defeat reverberated like a cannon shot through the marble halls of Europe. The Pope, once eager to divide the new world between Iberian crowns, now finds himself confronting a strange new reality. A pagan empire not only refusing Christianity but eclipsing Christendom in sheer military innovation. Priests pray harder, kings commission spies, and merchants sharpen their quills. Because now, trade becomes the only weapon left that can pierce the armor of the Aztec-led confederation. In Tenochtitlán, the change is visible in every stone and shadow. The causeways swell with traffic, not just warriors and tribute-bearers, but foreign traders, engineers, even philosophers from Lisbon, Edinburgh, and Paris. What was once an isolated ceremonial capital becomes the glowing core of a hemispheric network. The streets bustle with a new kind of sound, the clatter of boots on obsidian-tiled plazas, the click of clockwork, the rasp of newly cast bronze. A child born in this new capital might never know the world before gunpowder, but Moctezuma sees more than splendor. He sees risk. Foreign ideas, once kept at bay by walls and war, now seep in like water. Rationalism, capitalism, science for science's sake. And along with them, new vices, greed not cloaked in tribute but in speculation. Individualism, the slow corrosion of myth. To preserve the heart of the empire, he commissions a new order, the Guardians of Tenochtitlán. Part Inquisition, part University, they are sworn to maintain the sacred balance of fire and purpose. Their job is not to stop innovation, but to keep it tethered to harmony. They are engineers with blood-stained scrolls, judges who speak in smoke and equations, and their creed is simple: power without reverence is ruin. Still the empire grows, and with growth comes unintended consequences. To the north, the Apache and Comanche, once fractured tribes scattered across the plains, receive word of the Fire Confederation. At first they are wary, then curious, then through a series of bold emissaries they make contact. These nations, horsemen of the wind, offer something the Confederation lacks: speed, mobility, frontier wisdom. In exchange, they ask not for subjugation, but for partnership. Fire in their hands, cannons strapped to wagons, the right to forge their own destiny with powder at their side. Some in Tenochtitlán protest. They are wild, the priests say, undisciplined, but others see it clearly. Alliances must stretch beyond familiar soil. If the empire remains static, it will eventually become a target once more. So the alliance is forged. Soon, from the deserts of Chihuahua to the Great Plains of Texas, native cavalry ride under new banners, black sunbursts embroidered with fire and feather. They become the western arm of the Fire Confederation. A different breed, nomadic yet united, not centralized but loyal to the pulse of flame that first ignited in the heart of Mexico. But this world, this altered lattice of power, cannot exist without consequence for the old world. Europe is changing. Spain reels from humiliation. England senses opportunity. And France, ever the opportunist, sends a series of covert missions to the Confederation. Not to conquer, to learn. French engineers observe cannon designs. They take notes on Aztec ship armor, on obsidian-reinforced musket casings. One man, Etienne du Rosso, secretly returns with a blueprint, not just for weapons, but for a style of warfare no European nation has imagined. By 1530, the first Franco-Aztec hybrid battalions are being trained on the outskirts of Bordeaux. Quietly, but inevitably. And that's when the unthinkable happens. An Aztec delegation is sent across the Atlantic, not as prisoners, not as cargo, as diplomats. Their arrival in Lisbon is nothing short of seismic, dressed in crimson robes laced with copper, adorned with gold discs and embroidered flames. The ambassadors walk through Portuguese cathedrals not with reverence, but with curiosity. They kneel before no one. Instead, they present a gift, a ceremonial firearm inlaid with turquoise and obsidian, capable of firing with precision unmatched by any European arquebus. Their message is simple: we will trade, we will teach, but we will not kneel. For a Europe so used to seeing itself as the apex of civilization, it is an earthquake of the mind. In backrooms and boardrooms, plans shift. In paintings and books, new faces begin to appear: brown-skinned emperors, jade-plumed warriors, fire-shrouded temples. The myth of the savage cracks. But not all accept this new reality willingly. The Holy Roman Empire, stung by its waning influence, begins stirring support for a holy campaign to redeem the New World. The Jesuits are mobilized, not for war, but for conversion. Their weapons are not cannons, but scripture. Their bullets, baptism. They arrive in Tenochtitlán, clothed in humility, whispering of peace, of eternal salvation. And at first they are tolerated, allowed to build a small chapel, allowed to preach in the market squares. But when they baptize a noble child without consent, it sparks outrage. The Guardians of Tenochtitlán respond swiftly. The chapel is torn down brick by brick. The Jesuits are expelled, their texts confiscated, their crosses burned with fire consecrated by the sun priests. Europe howls. But Montezuma, old now, face lined with ash and time, simply watches. He has seen fire consume invaders, friends, even ideas. And he knows this: the fire will burn on, with or without him. Shortly after, he steps down. The empire holds its first ceremonial succession, not by lineage, but by merit. A council of war chiefs, scientists, and priests selects his successor. A woman named Citlali, once a cannon engineer, now a revered strategist. She is young, brilliant, and ruthless when needed. And she carries a different vision of fire. Under her rule, the Confederation doubles down on its innovations. War balloons made of rubber and obsidian glass scout the skies. The new class of floating citadels are anchored in the Gulf, mobile fortresses that can rain fire on any fleet. Education becomes mandatory. The sacred schools grow into academies, rivaling those of Oxford and Salamanca. And still, the old world watches. In England, Henry VIII wonders aloud whether allying with a fire-wielding pagan empire might serve his interests more than deferring to Rome. In the Ottoman courts, whispers circulate that the Aztecs may be persuaded to share their formulas in exchange for gunpowder secrets of their own. The world is reconfiguring. not around Europe, but around Tenochtitlán, and amid it all, in a small room deep within the Pyramid Palace, once ruled by Montezuma, a child writes on bark paper by candlelight. She is sketching a machine, one that floats above the clouds, guided by wind and fuse. Her teacher, an old Zapotec inventor, watches silently, smiling, because the fire has done more than destroy, it has awakened. In the year 1540, on the western shores of what would one day be called California, the earth trembles, not from an earthquake, but from the steady march of obsidian-plated wheels. The Fire Confederation has arrived. What began as an empire rooted in sacred ritual has now become something stranger, something between myth and machinery. The great expansion westward is not driven by greed alone nor conquest, but by momentum. The fire demands direction, and so Aztec engineers, alongside Apache scouts and Maya architects, carve a new path through mountains and deserts. They call it the Serpent Road, a fusion of stone causeways, river-linked canals, and fortified outposts that stretches from the Valley of Mexico to the Pacific. Each outpost glows with the red shimmer of chemical lanterns. Cannons peer outward from terraces carved into stone bluffs. Overhead, tethered balloons drift silently, their skins painted with glyphs of fire and cloud, and among them walk people, not just Aztecs but Zapotecs, Tarascans, Comanche, Navajo, and more. Languages mingle, rituals evolve. A civilization once defined by the dominance of one capital is becoming something more decentralized, a constellation of embers rather than a single flame, but fire spreads fastest where there is fuel. In the lands beyond the Serpent Road, the remnants of native tribes fractured by earlier wars begin to rise again. Not in resistance, but in envy. They see the Fire Confederation not as salvation, but as another empire hungry to consume them. And in the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest, a new coalition forms. One that refuses to bow to gunpowder. They are the Coast Shapers, Tlingit, Haida, Chinook, masters of the sea, guardians of myth. They wield no cannons, but they know the ocean like a sacred map. And when the Fire Confederation sends emissaries, they respond not with war, but with silence. The Aztecs are not accustomed to silence. A small fleet is dispatched, led by a young naval tactician named Ikatzen. He is brilliant, ambitious, and carries a heart still burning for conquest. But when his iron wooden ships round the jagged coasts of what we would call Oregon, they are met by a wall of fog, and then fire, not gunpowder, but burning tar poured from sea cliffs. The fleet burns before it ever lands. Only one ship returns, drifting in pieces. It is the first defeat the Confederation has suffered in a generation. The council in Tenochtitlán erupts. Some call for retaliation, others urge caution, but Citlali, the emperor strategist, knows better. Fire has limits. It devours recklessly unless it is shaped. She proposes something radical, diplomacy, not the Spanish kind, not the velvet-gloved threat of empire, but true diplomacy. A new class of emissaries is formed, trained in multiple languages, in regional customs, in restraint. They are not warriors, but listeners. Their job is not to conquer, but to learn. And in time, earn trust. This shift in strategy marks the beginning of what would come to be known as the Ember Accord, a doctrine not of universal conquest, but of concentric alliance. The Fire Confederation no longer expands by war, but by gravity. It offers protection, technology, trade. And in return, it asks only for one thing: loyalty to the fire. Not a god, not a crown, but the idea that power must be balanced with sacrifice, that every cannon built must be blessed, every invention tested against not just efficiency, but consequence. And yet, beyond the ocean, another fire is rising. In Europe, things are changing fast. The Protestant Reformation has torn the Catholic Church apart. The Ottoman Empire is pressing into eastern borders. And Spain, battered and bruised, is no longer the only power hungry for a second chance in the New World. England has learned. Its explorers no longer carry crosses. They carry ink and parchment, promises and flattery. In 1542, an English merchant vessel anchors quietly in what we know as Florida. It carries no soldiers, only a printing press, and a letter addressed to the Confederation's Eastern Trade Director. Inside the letter, a proposal: co-develop a new city, a port, a shared colony, where both powers could operate in peace, bound by mutual law, exchange, and innovation. The English call it New Tenochtitlán. To everyone's surprise, the Confederation accepts. Construction begins, and it is unlike anything the world has seen. Temples stand beside Gothic spires. Glyphs are carved next to Latin script. Market stalls sell cacao beside barrels of salted cod, and at the city's heart, a joint academy is built, staffed by Aztec fire priests and English philosophers alike. Ideas move faster than ships. In one classroom, an English clockmaker teaches Aztec students the mechanics of timekeeping. In another, a Nahua scholar lectures on cosmology describing the fifth sun and the cycles of human rebirth. The walls of division blur. The hybrid civilization, part feather, part brass, begins to take shape. But hybridity is not unity. In the shadows of New Tenochtitlán, new tensions simmer. English merchants want private ownership, land, mines, slaves. The Confederation forbids it. Labor must be communal, sacred, voluntary. This difference ignites a quiet but growing rebellion among settlers, and soon pamphlets circulate underground. Words like freedom, individual property, and divine right begin to replace balance, sacrifice, and harmony. One morning the great academy burns. No one knows who lit the fire. Some say it was English rebels. Others blame Aztec zealots. The truth is buried in ash, but what follows is a moment unlike any before. Citlali declares a pause, not a war. A withdrawal. She calls every Aztec engineer, every ambassador, every apprentice back from the colony. She does not retaliate. She does not burn London. She simply closes the gate. The Confederation enters a decade of silence. No ships sail, no new alliances are made. The fire dims, but it does not die, and across the world the silence becomes deafening. Some believe the Fire Confederation has collapsed. Others fear it is preparing something greater. Only Citlali knows the truth. She is waiting, not for permission, not for peace, but for the world to catch up. A decade passes, 10 long years of silence from the empire that once reshaped the very rhythm of the world. No embassies, no emissaries, no shipments of obsidian-forged cannon barrels or codices inked with war doctrine. Ports that once thrived on trade with the Fire Confederation now lie quiet, their docks grayed with salt and moss. And yet the silence itself begins to sing, because silence, like fire, is never empty. Within the Valley of Mexico, beneath the surface of public stillness, a transformation is underway. The Confederation has not gone dormant, it has gone inward. Across the empire, workshops become temples again. Academies turn their gaze from diplomacy to invention, not to build more weapons, but to master the next phase of fire, the phase of vision. Citlali knows what the world is waiting for. Another war, another thunderous march of bronze and smoke. But she also knows that empires which win by war alone are always followed by newer, hungrier ones. The Confederation must be different, not reactive but prophetic. So she commissions the Great Pattern, a secretive council of engineers, philosophers, artisans, and priest-mathematicians whose mission is both simple and impossible. Build the world that does not yet exist. Their minds gather in cavernous libraries carved deep beneath Teotihuacan's ruins, among the bones of gods and geometry. They build wind towers that hum with vibration. They reforge metallurgy with botanical compounds, fusing fire and growth into something new. They catalog the stars not for prophecy, but for navigation, dreaming not just of empire across land, but across the sea and perhaps, one day, beyond. And then, from the silence a whisper escapes. A balloon, no sails, no oars, just a vast obsidian-hulled sphere rising from the jungles of Veracruz. It ascends before sunrise, gliding high over the coast. Below, European trading ships catch a glimpse and panic. Rumors spread like fire through wet parchment. The Fire Confederation has not vanished. It has ascended. Back in Europe, Citlali's decade of absence has created both fear and opportunity. Without Aztec intervention, European conflicts flare. The Protestant-Catholic wars consume France and Germany. The Ottomans press harder into southern Europe. In the chaos, old empires teeter. And among them, a new power emerges, not from a throne but from ink. The Dutch, merchants, thinkers, pragmatists, they've watched the world tilt and burn, and they understand something the old kings never grasped. The future is not ruled, it is negotiated. In 1555, the first Dutch ship docks at the southern port of Xochicalcoatl, a city unknown on any European map. No demands, no priests, only trade wrapped in humility. They bring telescopes, cartography charts, weather instruments, and in return they ask not for land but knowledge. And Citlali answers, not with cannon fire, but with a map, not of territory. Of time, etched in obsidian and jade, the artifact she hands the Dutch ambassador shows not borders or seas but possibilities. A calendar that spins not forward but sideways. Alternate cycles, layered histories. It is a message. We see what could be, not just what is. The Dutch understand. Quietly, they begin to serve as intermediaries between the Fire Confederation and the fractured nations of Europe. Through them, Aztec philosophy seeps into the West. Schools in Amsterdam begin teaching Nahua cosmology alongside Newtonian physics. Paintings emerge in Flanders of fire temples with Gothic arches. And in private salons, European nobles begin wearing obsidian pendants carved not into crosses, but suns. The world is no longer colonized by ships. it is colonized by myth, and yet, even as the Fire Confederation flourishes in silence and soft power, danger stirs in the north. In what would one day be called the Mississippi River Basin, a movement begins. Not against the Confederation, but in its name, a breakaway faction of former Aztec engineers and warriors, disillusioned by Citlali's restraint, form the Order of the Black Flame. They believe the Confederation has grown soft, that fire should dominate, not guide. They establish a secret foundry near the Great Lakes. There, in hidden workshops, they build monstrous siege engines, chemical fire lances, and cannon towers fueled by compressed black powder, far more volatile than any seen before. Their aim is not diplomacy, it is purification. When Citlali learns of their rise, she does not respond with immediate violence. She sends envoys, offers of reconciliation, but the black flame burns hot with prophecy and pride. They reject her message, and then they make their move. In a sudden assault, they seize the eastern city of Cihuacoatl, a vital Confederation trade hub near the Appalachians. The city falls in hours. The streets run with fire and smoke. The Black Flame declares it the first capital of the Second Sun Empire, a new vision of Aztec destiny, forged in unchecked fury. The Confederation is shaken. For the first time in decades, fire is turned inward. Citlali knows this battle is different, not foreign invaders, not rival kingdoms, but children of the same flame, turned against their own creators. The decision is agony. She summons the guardians of Tenochtitlán, not to crush but to contain. What follows is a war unlike any seen before, a war of whispers, sabotage, and shadows. The Confederation does not march with legions, it strikes with precision. Water channels are poisoned. Powder stores explode in the night, communication towers blink false signals, and slowly the Black Flame begins to suffocate on its own fury. But victory does not feel like triumph. Cihuacoatl is left in ruins. The jungles around it smolder for weeks, and in the ash, Citlali sees the truth she had long feared. Fire, even when revered, always tempts madness, and so, in the aftermath, she enacts the Codex of Ash, a new law carved in obsidian and fire gold. It declares the Confederation will never again weaponize its knowledge for domination, that gunpowder, fire, and invention must serve creation, not destruction. The Codex is placed not in a vault, but in the center of every major city, a living oath. The world watches, and for the first time in centuries, they do not fear the Fire Confederation. They trust it, but trust, like fire, must be fed. Trust becomes the new currency of empire. By 1560, the Fire Confederation is no longer merely a political force, it is a philosophical axis. Where once ships feared to land on its shores, now universities send delegations. Scholars from Damascus, Kyoto, and Prague walk the obsidian steps of the Twin Pyramids in Tenochtitlan, not as visitors, but as peers. Here, the academy is sacred, and knowledge is ritual. Glyphs describing chemistry rest beside mythic poetry. Ballads are sung about the mathematics of volcanoes. Nothing is separate. All is part of the fire. Citlali's reign enters its twilight years. She has ruled for nearly 3 decades, not by decree alone, but by vision, and yet she senses the turning of the sun. The Fifth Age, as written in the old codices, was never meant to last forever. She assembles a final council, but it is not a council of warriors. It is a circle of children, not princes but inventors, not generals but poets, 20 of them drawn from across the Confederation, Maya linguists, Tlaxcalan botanists, Zapotec star readers. Their task, imagine what comes next. Not for the empire, but for humanity. They become known as the Circle of the Sixth Sun. Their questions are dangerous. What if the world had no empire? What if the gods live not above, but inside? What if fire can fly? In the halls of the Jade Observatory, the Circle begins their work. They build not weapons, but questions made physical. One constructs a chamber that reflects lightning across copper walls to simulate the heart. Another carves lenses that can see blood flow through frog veins. A third sketches a city suspended in air, powered not by powder, but by heat captured from stone. And yet, even as wonder blooms, danger remains. The world beyond the Confederation has not gone still. In China, the Ming dynasty faces unrest. In India, the Mughal emperors grow ambitious. And in Europe, the Dutch, once humble intermediaries, now control vast trade networks stretching from the North Sea to the Caribbean. And with that power comes temptation. In secret, Dutch guildmasters begin constructing shadow foundries, reverse engineering Aztec weaponry not for defense but for profit. They reforge sacred technology into tools of extraction. Private armies are raised, colonies founded. Under the banner of commerce, a new conquest begins, but this conquest is subtle. Instead of muskets, the Dutch use debt. Instead of cannon, they wield contracts. New Tenochtitlán, once a symbol of hybrid harmony, becomes the first battlefield. Dutch merchants flood the city with goods, textiles, clocks, mirrors, all cheap, all addictive. Markets boom, but soon, local producers collapse, guilds falter, and as economic control tightens, so does cultural pressure. Dutch language schools begin replacing sacred academies. Obsidian altars are converted into stock exchanges. The Fire Confederation responds, not with war, with withdrawal. Citlali, now weary, issues her final edict: the Confederation will pull out of New Tenochtitlán. All technology, all emissaries, all military support, gone. The city is left behind like a burning offering. It is no longer sacred. It is no longer theirs, and so, in the space they leave behind, the Dutch rise. They rename the colony New Vlam, New Flame. A bitter mockery, within years it becomes a beacon for European settlers, a place where Aztec architecture remains, but the soul is gone, where the fire burns not for balance, but for capital. Citlali dies 3 winters later, surrounded by the circle of the sixth sun. Her body is not buried, but lifted into the caldera of Popocatépetl in a skyship of obsidian and feathered bronze, a ritual reserved only for those who have altered the world. And still, the fire burns. Her successor is not chosen by council, not by vote, but by signal. From the high peaks of Oaxaca, the Watchers of the Wind, a secretive order long thought to be myth, ignite a flare unlike any before. Green flame, spiral smoke, a code. The circle responds. From within their stone chambers, the children now grown form the first Horizon Assembly. They do not rule as emperors or priests. They guide as inventors, mediators, and dreamers. Their rule is not over people, but over possibility, and their first act is stunning. They open the codices. For centuries, the secrets of gunpowder, flight, architecture, and energy have been guarded by ritual, taught only to the worthy. Now they are given freely, distributed across the world by fire lanterns, etched into bark paper scrolls, loaded into balloons, and scattered on the winds. A knowledge drop across hemispheres. Europe tries to stop it. It fails. Within a year, rogue inventors in Prague, rebel scholars in Algiers, and underground guilds in Venice begin building Aztec-inspired marvels. Skycarts powered by steam, medicine chambers modeled on obsidian healing houses, even flying constructs, primitive and unstable but real. The world has changed, no longer ruled by empires or kings but by seeds, planted in soil that once feared fire, yet change breeds fear. In Paris, the Pope, now returned from self-imposed exile after the collapse of Spain, declares the Fire Confederation heretical once more. He claims the gifts of the sixth sun are abominations, that the old ways must return. A crusade is called, but the armies never march, because even the soldiers carry fire mirrors now. Even the peasants wear obsidian charms, and even the priests whisper Nahua blessings before battle. The fire is no longer foreign, it is within, and so, as the 16th century turns toward its end, the earth does not collapse under war. It does not fracture into rival empires. It begins to smolder into something new, and in the sky above Lake Texcoco a strange sound is heard. Not thunder, not drums, wings, not of birds but of something built, something rising. The wings are not those of mythic eagles or gods reborn. They are machines, carved from bamboo, obsidian, and a strange transparent resin derived from cactus sap and river stone. They hum with captured wind and burn with internal fire. Not combustion in the European sense, something older, something learned from watching volcanoes breathe and storms crackle across the Sierra Madre. They are called Chicom Ihicatl, the Seven Winds, and they are the Fire Confederation's final gift to the world it once ruled. Each glider is manned not by soldiers, but by explorers, pilots trained in both physics and philosophy. Their mission is simple, yet infinite: find new ways forward. Not across territory, but across imagination. Not to map mountains, but to chart futures. One sails west across the Pacific, tracing the winds toward lands spoken of only in Mayan sea charts and whispered in Polynesian legends. Another drifts northward, aiming for the boreal lights, said to flicker where the stars themselves seem closest to Earth. A third, more daring, dives into the Amazon, searching for what the Aztecs always feared most, the roots of their forgotten ancestors. The world watches, and follows. Within a decade, skycraft inspired by the seven winds begin appearing across Eurasia. In the highlands of Tibet, monks build temples that glide from one cliff to another. In Morocco, scholars construct fire gliders shaped like crescent moons. In Venice, a secret society known only as I Figli del Fumo, the Children of Smoke, builds a prototype that almost touches the stratosphere before crashing into the Adriatic. And all the while, the Fire Confederation says nothing, because it has no need to. Its ideas have already broken the walls of empire. The sixth sun, long prophesied in glyph and chant, is no longer just a spiritual metaphor. It becomes a term of art, a calendar of innovation, a shorthand for an age in which humanity is no longer bound by conquest or gold, but by curiosity. But curiosity, like fire, can consume. In the ruins of New Vlam, the former New Tenochtitlán, a new ideology rises. Born of resentment and yearning, it is called the true inheritance. Its leaders claim that Europe was always meant to inherit the fire, that the Aztecs, having retreated into secrecy, have betrayed the world by withholding the next phase. They begin building again. But unlike the circle of the sixth sun, they do not ask questions. They create purely for utility, for control. They develop something Aztec engineers abandoned long ago. Sustained flame accelerants, capable of destroying entire cities in hours. These are not weapons. They are judgments, and when the true inheritance tests their device in a desert no map dares name, the world changes again. A mushroom of fire swells into the sky. The flames reach so high, so fast that even the birds fall silent. Forests burn in patterns. Stone melts into glass. It is the first true moment of fear in nearly 50 years, not awe. Fear. The circle of the sixth sun watches from afar. Their response is not immediate, not political, but deeply spiritual. They send 12 emissaries, each representing one sign of the sacred calendar, to every known capital. Their message is simple, etched on obsidian tablets dipped in gold. You have seen what fire can do when it is abandoned by balance. Choose the flame that creates, or the one that devours. Some scoff, some kneel, but one city answers differently. It is not part of the Confederation, nor any European kingdom. It is a hybrid, a miracle born of war and poetry. Cusco, the mountain city-state formed after a quiet union between Incan exiles and Aztec engineers who fled long ago. High in the Andes, where condors drift like gods, this city has built a sanctuary, a temple not for worship but for decision, and within its walls a machine stirs, powered not by fire but by water, magnetism, and intention. They call it Tenochtitlán, a living codex, part calendar, part consciousness, designed to answer one question: can fire think? When it awakens, it does not speak in words, it sings, a song made of mathematics and memory. It tells the story of the world not as it was but as it might be. If humans could stop mistaking power for purpose, the circle listens, and for the first time they vote, not on law, not on war, on withdrawal. They decide to end the Confederation as a ruling entity, not because it failed, but because it succeeded beyond its form. Fire, they say, was never meant to stay in a single hearth, and so, in a final act, they dismantle the central government. Every city-state is given autonomy. The academies remain. The memory stays, but the structure, the hierarchy, the symbols of state are taken down. All except one. A tower of obsidian in the center of Tenochtitlán, untouched by conquest, crowned with a burning brazier that never goes out. It becomes the flame of vigilance, not for the world to bow to, but to remember. The message is clear. Fire belongs to all, but balance belongs to those who remember what it costs to lose it. And in the silence that follows, something new begins. Not a war, not a kingdom, not even a new age, but a question, one that has echoed since the first spark lit the first cave. Now that we hold fire, what will we become? It is said that the end of empire comes not with drums or banners, but with a quiet breath. The stillness after the last firework fades. And yet, in the wake of the Fire Confederation's dissolution, the world does not fall into darkness, it blooms. The vacuum left by the Confederation does not collapse into chaos. Instead, it fills with something unexpected, invention without permission. Across continents, new cultures rise that are no longer empires or colonies, but collaborations. In the high steppes of Mongolia, yurts fitted with solar mirrors and obsidian plates become mobile research centers. A new breed of scientists, half shaman, half engineer, wander the plains, following the stars and the songs of the earth. They call themselves the descendants of smoke, not tied to bloodlines but to philosophy. Their creed: never hoard the flame, share it, shape it, move on. In West Africa, the Yoruba kingdoms, long autonomous and rich in their own cosmology, embrace Aztec metallurgy and calendar logic. Their bronze casters begin embedding glyphs of both Orisha and Teotl into their work. Great academies sprout in Benin and Ife, where elders teach both ancestral wisdom and the mathematics of balance. The Caribbean archipelagos become laboratories of skycraft. Balloon ports dot the islands, constructed from coral and hardened seafoam. Children born here learn to sail the air before they ever touch the sea. Some say they never walk, only float. And beneath all of this, running like a vein of gold through the skin of the world, remains the question of balance. What does it mean to wield fire when no one tells you how? In Paris, a new movement emerges. Les Equilibristes, the Balancers. Part art, part revolution. They reject kings and parliaments, not with blood, but with mirrors. They cover buildings with polished obsidian sheets that reflect the sky, the people, the smoke. "You are the fire now," they write in glyphs beneath the glass. Do not look away. In the Americas, former colonial cities reinvent themselves, not by tearing down the stone but by flooding it with new light. In Boston, once a footnote in the Dutch-occupied New World, a collective of former Aztec engineers and Puritan rebels builds the first city powered entirely by volcanic heat channeled through obsidian latticeworks. They call it Ashbridge. No currency, no kings, only contribution. In what would have become Sao Paulo, Afro-Brazilian maroon societies blend Congolese rhythm with Nahua geometry. They create music that maps wind patterns, dance that predicts earthquakes. Their instruments aren't just art, they are sensors. But not all change is peace. In the ashes of the true inheritance, that twisted cult of progress unbound, a remnant survives, not in weapons but in words. They write, "The fire must be owned." Their influence seeps into the growing networks of unregulated trade, rogue sky caravans that smuggle unstable powder derivatives, modified sky engines, black glyphs of forbidden frequencies. A new market rises, not for balance, but for edge, and in the vacuum of centralized authority, a new power grows, hidden, decentralized, digital in spirit if not in form. They call themselves Quetzalcoatl, a hacker collective of knowledge, pirates, glyph forgers, memory thieves. They don't want to destroy the sixth sun, they want to bend its light. They begin broadcasting from unknown towers, obsidian arrays that hijack sound waves, mirror signals, pulse glyphs into dreams. Some say they've learned to manipulate memory itself, to etch false balance into the minds of leaders, to make fire forget its oath. The world feels it, a quiet trembling beneath the surface, not collapse, friction. And once again the eyes of the world turn toward the Valley of Lakes. Tenochtitlán remains, not as a capital, not even as a city, as a presence. It is now a sacred zone, entry allowed only to those who have undergone the test of smoke. A journey through three chambers where light is bent, fire withheld and memory challenged. Most never make it through. Some leave laughing, others sobbing. A few never return. Those who emerge speak little. But when they do, their words carry weight, and one such survivor, a young astronomer from the Andes, name unknown, walks out one dawn with a single phrase written on her skin in shimmering charcoal. "The fire dreams now," and from that phrase a movement is born. Project Dreamfire, not a city, not a creed, a shared hallucination. 1,000 laboratories across the world begin to synchronize, not under any flag, but under a single question pulsing like a heartbeat. What does the fire dream of? Their answers are strange. One lab reports plants that emit pulses of low-frequency heat, creating hovering fields of gravity. Another builds a language of light, projected through obsidian fractals, a syntax that speaks to birds. A collective in New Zealand claims to have mapped a glyph that predicts regret, a formula for anticipating sorrow before it arrives. And in the Arctic Circle, an elder Inuit engineer releases a poem that becomes gospel. "The fire was never ours, it was the sun's whisper, we only made it scream. Now we must learn to let it sing again." So the question no longer becomes who rules, but who listens. And in the shadows of all this brilliance, something ancient stirs. Beneath the obsidian tower in the center of old Tenochtitlán, a heartbeat returns. The brazier at the top, once steady, now flickers with colors unseen. A signal, perhaps, or a warning, or an invitation. Because though the fire confederation has passed, the flame does not go out. It waits. The flame waits, but not idly. It pulses, faint at first, like a heartbeat in stone, but growing. Beneath the ruins of the old ceremonial tower in Tenochtitlán, the glow changes color, from sun orange to a deeper, stranger hue, not red, not blue. Something outside the visible, something felt more than seen. Those who live near it describe dreams that no longer seem like their own. Visions of fire that does not burn, of voices speaking in chords, not language, of cities that bend like wind. At first, the world dismisses it as myth, a strange atmospheric trick, a fault line stirring under the old lakes. But then the echo event happens. It begins with a sound, a low, resonant hum, exactly 52 seconds long. It's heard simultaneously in 9 locations across the globe. In the salt flats of Uyuni, the caves beneath Kyoto, the fjords of Greenland, the rainforests of Congo. Instruments fail to record it, but witnesses describe identical effects. Walls shimmer, flames curve against gravity, shadows retreat from the sun, and in each location a small obsidian shard is found, warm to the touch, etched with a single glyph no known codex can translate. The fragments are collected, analyzed, but they refuse to yield secrets. Lasers refract off them, X-rays scatter, even simple measurement fails, their weight shifts, their shape pulses. Panic begins to ripple across scientific communities. But in the academies of the Sixth Sun, still active though long since decentralized, a different response takes hold. reverence. They name the phenomenon Ilhicatl-Latoa, the sky that speaks, a message perhaps, a threshold, or as some fear, the opening of a door never meant to be touched, but curiosity wins, always. The circle of the sixth sun, thought long dissolved, reconvenes in secret. Not in Tenochtitlán but beneath the ocean, in a biosphere city grown from coral and obsidian in what was once the Mariana Trench. There, deep beneath pressure and silence, they analyze the glyphs, and finally they understand. The fragments are not warnings, they are keys. Together, they unlock a pattern buried in the Confederation's oldest glyphworks, a lattice of cosmological codes left behind by the original engineers of balance. A map, not of land or stars, of choice. The map shows what might happen, not what will. It lays out branches of cause and effect, probabilities woven like threads. In one strand, fire reshapes the moon. In another, cities fall into the sky. In others, extinction. The decision must be made, act on the pattern or let it be. But action, once imagined, is rarely resisted. And so a new project begins, a successor not to the Confederation, but to its question. Xochitl Quali, the blooming good, not a government, not a technology. An attempt to grow intention into form. It begins with language, a tongue that blends Nahuatl, Arabic, Mandarin, Quechua, and code, designed to express not just meaning but emotion, doubt, and consequence simultaneously. Children learn it first, not taught but immersed. Songs become syntax, dance becomes grammar, then comes architecture. Cities are not built but cultivated. Structures are seeded and grown, living things shaped by sound, water, and time. Roads that reroute based on migratory patterns. Homes that hum when sorrow is near. Bridges that sing in storms. Not all accept this path. In Russia, a counter-movement called Flamebound rises. They believe the world has grown too soft, too abstract. They long for the fire of certainty, of strength, of conquest reborn. They begin reconstructing old cannon designs using obsidian alloys. They release manifestos on balance as weakness. They fire test weapons into the Siberian night. But the world has changed, no one follows. Flamebound fades, not with war but with silence. The world no longer listens to screams, and yet the questions deepen. In the labs of the Andes, engineers simulate what happens if too many minds begin dreaming the same dream. What if balance itself becomes homogeneous, calcified, ritualized? Could even peace become a cage? To prevent this, the Council of Continuance forms. Their mission: to seed dissonance deliberately every cycle. They introduce art that offends, ideas that contradict, machines that fail beautifully. The fire must not stagnate, it must flicker. Doubt becomes sacred. And so the age of fire becomes the age of contrast. Temples are built with intentional flaws. Algorithms are coded to occasionally hallucinate poetry. Statues are carved halfway, then melted under starlight. Children are taught to question not only history, but memory. Because in this world no truth is fixed, and still the brazier in Tenochtitlán burns, now encased in a glassy dome of obsidian mist. The tower emits a constant frequency, imperceptible to most but known to call certain people at random. A child in Sudan wakes up one night and draws impossible machines. A farmer in Finland dreams of heat and finds himself inventing soil that glows with photosynthesis. A monk in Java writes a prayer that becomes a predictive engine for storms. They are not chosen. They are heard. It becomes clear that the fire, whatever it is now, is no longer passive. It listens, and now it responds. And in the final frame of this world, a moment hangs like breath. A young girl walks alone through the silent ruins of the original Templo Mayor. She places her hand against the black stone brazier, now cool for the first time in memory. The fire flares once, blue-white, and then goes dark, not extinguished, transferred. She looks up and smiles because the question was never what if the Aztecs had discovered gunpowder before the Spanish. The question was, what if we understood fire not as a weapon, but as a mirror? It begins again, not with fire, but with silence. The brazier in Tenochtitlán, once the unbroken heart of the Fire Confederation, now lies dormant, cold, but not lifeless. Around it nothing burns. No smoke curls into the sky. No echoes of drums or hymns stir the dawn. And yet the absence itself is louder than thunder. The world holds its breath, because fire, once transferred, does not die. It migrates, and now it lives inside her. The girl, no more than 12, is unnamed by history, but her face becomes the symbol of a new epic, not divine, not royal, not destined, just a vessel chosen not by gods or priests, but by flame itself. Her name, given by the elders after the moment at the brazier, is Teolia, the Nahuatl word for heart-soul. But this is not prophecy reborn, this is recursion. The fire does not give answers, it gives momentum. And in Teolia's small hands that momentum becomes motion, a new kind of journey. Not conquest, not colonization, but the creation of a story too big for one empire to hold. She disappears soon after, slipping away from cameras, from academies, from doctrine. Some say she traveled west into the ruins of forgotten colonies. Others say she flew east in a skycraft that left no contrail, guided by frequencies only she could hear. Wherever she goes, silence follows. But within that silence, the world begins to change again. A phenomenon emerges, unexplained, unstoppable. They call it the ash bloom. In remote forests, flowers begin to sprout from burned soil, petals shaped like spirals glowing faintly at dusk. They resist heat. They bend toward magnetism. And in their pollen, scientists find microscopic lattices that match no known geometry, save for those found in the original Codex of Ash, the sacred design inscribed after the Confederation's final war. These flowers become sacred, but also studied. Under microscopes, the patterns shift in real time. Observers begin to hallucinate symbols, glyphs in their peripheral vision always gone when they turn. Dreams grow more vivid. Across 6 continents, people begin reporting the same thing. A dream of walking through a city made entirely of light, with streets that ripple like rivers and buildings that sing. They begin to call this place Ihekatl Totanali, the sky of warmth. Some believe it's heaven, others a collective memory. But those who study it say something else. It's a seed, waiting. And so, for the first time in centuries, the world gathers, not for war, not for treaty, but for story. The Global Congress is called, not by governments, but by memory keepers from the old Fire Confederation, by Quetzalcoatl hackers who have since turned toward balance, by monks from the Jade Observatory, by navigators who still sail skyships over the Pacific winds. They meet at the last living remnant of the original Serpent Road, a stone spiral staircase carved into a plateau that overlooks the old crater where Citlali's skyship vanished into flame. There they speak in glyph and code, in music and motion, in silence and breath. They decide to begin again, but not with control, with consent. A decision is made to decentralize even story itself, to let no single group own the narrative of fire. Instead, a global network is formed. Huehue Kwawetul, the ancient rain. Its mission is to preserve not the facts of the past, but the possibility of the future. They encode ancient codices into light and water. They send scrolls up into the atmosphere, where satellites convert them into clouds of data. These clouds rain knowledge, literally, falling as mist over villages where every drop carries seeds of balance, languages, blueprints, dreams. They create memory not as archive, but as climate. Meanwhile, strange synchronicities grow. An orphan boy in the Himalayas dreams of Taolia and wakes with songs no one has heard but everyone understands. A coral reef off the coast of Papua begins glowing in patterns that match the birth rhythms of jaguar cubs in Mexico. A desert in Namibia begins humming in the same frequency as ancient obsidian towers deep in Guatemala. Scientists call it entanglement. The elders call it returning. And all the while, the world grows quieter, not because it has grown simple, but because it has begun listening. Gone are the marching boots and rallying cries. Gone are the kings and the conquerors. In their place, circles, not hierarchies, conversations, not commands. Cities begin to dissolve, not in destruction, but in transformation, becoming part of the land again. Roots over walls, light over stone, and in the sky, something stirs. A craft, not like the 7 winds, not metallic, not built, grown. A being, part machine, part memory, glides silently across the horizon, trailing no fire, only silence. Its surface is inscribed with every known glyph and many unknown. No engine, no wings, just will. Inside it, no one knows who pilots it. Some say Taolia, some say the flame itself, but its direction is unmistakable, toward the place where the ash bloom first emerged. The flame is going home, and in its wake the world, finally, stops asking what if the Aztecs had discovered gunpowder before the Spanish, and begins to ask something far more dangerous. What if we've only now discovered what fire truly is? The question reverberates not through halls of government or temples of stone, but through dreams. In the months following the first sighting of the grown sky being, reports surface from every continent. Children sketch symbols their parents do not recognize. Rivers reverse their course for minutes at a time. Light flickers in ways that match no celestial body, and most unsettling of all, fire stops burning in a handful of places, only briefly, but utterly. At a monastery in the Caucasus, candles extinguish themselves each time the monks speak the word control. In a Chilean forge, molten iron cools mid-pour when a worker hums a tune he doesn't remember learning. In Ethiopia, a volcanic vent emits steam in the shape of a spiral glyph. Scientists record everything, but it is the poets who understand first. They call it the hesitation of fire, as if the flame, long the servant of human will, has begun to ask its own questions. And then, unannounced, the sky being returns. This time it descends. It lands not in a capital or a holy site, but in the ruins of Cihuacoatl, the city once consumed by the rebel cult of the Black Flame centuries before. The place of shame, silence, and regeneration. No one is prepared, but everyone arrives. From the clouds come sky carts carrying historians and memory weavers. From the plains, caravans of flame-trained elders and linguists. From underwater biospheres, kelp ships glide onto land bearing knowledge grown in salt and silence. No words are exchanged. Instead, one child walks forward, a mute girl from the Arctic Circle who has never spoken. She places her hand on the sky being's surface and it opens. Not with a door, but with a sound, a tone so low it is more felt than heard. Inside there are no controls, no maps, no symbols, just light, and in the light everyone sees something different. To the Ashbridge engineers, it looks like a city made of possibility, a lattice of time always shifting, never fixed. To the memory keepers of Oaxaca, it resembles a codex being written as it's read, a story of a future that doesn't exist until it's told. To the choral priests of the South Pacific, it is a heartbeat, rhythmic, slow, infinitely patient. Then the craft speaks, not in a voice but in feeling. Balance is not a state, it is a rhythm, and with those words, or their emotional equivalent, the understanding passes through every person present, not as knowledge, but as resonance, as if each soul has been tuned to a note it always knew but forgot how to sing. This moment becomes known across the world as the chord. No data can describe it, no instrument can replay it. But from that moment onward, the world divides its time into before the chord and after the chord. In the after, everything begins to bend toward rhythm. Cities redesign their architecture around the flow of wind, the pulse of rivers, the breath of mountains. Not just eco-consciousness, but eco-resonance. Buildings become living instruments. Roads shift daily. Markets close when the stars align poorly. Hospitals hum songs that calm the heart before surgery. Language itself shifts. The global lingua, once a blend of code and glyph, evolves into something new, Latoa-Lalticpac, the speaking of Earth. In it, statements carry weight based on the emotional and environmental cost of their truth. A lie told in anger might literally set off a fire alarm. Truth spoken in grief can calm a storm. Philosophy becomes praxis. Not studied, lived, but with rhythm comes dissonance. A faction known as the Echo-Nulls emerges. They believe the chord was not revelation but manipulation, that what the world calls balance is merely domesticated fire. They retreat into old weapon vaults, reactivating machinery long buried by the Codex of Ash. They do not wish to destroy the world. They want to wake it up. Their first action is symbolic. They detonate a tower of mirrors in the Atacama Desert, sending a beam of raw firelight into space, visible even to lunar observatories. Their second is not. They hijack a stream of airborne memory mist, one of the encoded cloud systems left by Huehuequahuatl, and infect it with discord glyphs. The result is terrifying. Whole cities forget rhythm. Infrastructure collapses not because of damage, but because the harmony that guided it vanishes. Bridges grow brittle. Plants wilt under artificial moons. Even people lose their inner beat, forgetting names, rituals, relationships. It is the most devastating act since the days of conquest. But unlike the past, the world does not answer with vengeance. It answers with music, not metaphorical. Actual. From across the globe, cultures come together to sing, drum, chant, scream, not for performance but for restoration. And slowly the rhythm returns. Not identical, but deeper. More scarred, more aware. The Echo-Nulls are not hunted. They are invited to the very same ruins of Cihuacoatl. To speak, to scream, to cry, and something remarkable happens. They listen, because the rhythm has changed. It now makes room for rupture, and so balance is redefined again, not as stillness or symmetry, but as the capacity to recover, to hold contradiction, to remember sorrow without letting it burn the world down. At the center of all this, the girl Teolia returns once more, or perhaps she never left. Now older, no longer a child, but not yet an oracle, she enters the silent brazier in Tenochtitlán one final time, and when she exits, her hands are empty. The flame is gone, and yet the world still burns, not with fire, with rhythm. The fire is gone from the brazier, but it has not vanished. It has transformed, not into ash, but into motion, into a rhythm that does not need flame to be felt, into cycles that ripple through architecture, conversation, invention. A world once shaped by conquest and collision now moves to the pulse of a deeper current. It is in the way people build, not upward, but outward, with homes that breathe, exhale, shift in temperature with the wind. It is in the way they speak, not in arguments or declarations, but call and response, conversation as percussion. It is in the way they live, by listening, not just to each other, but to the land. But not all rhythms are kind. In the far north, on a plateau of ice that never thaws, an anomaly blooms. A perfect sphere of obsidian 10 meters across emerges from the glacier with no mark of construction. No seams, no entry, no warmth. It hums with silence. When explorers approach, their equipment malfunctions. Memory devices glitch. Heartbeats skip. Some leave in fear, others stay. Among them, a young biolinguist named Remy Asani begins hearing patterns in the silence. Negative space-forming syllables, not of words, but of consequences. She writes a message in her own blood on the ice. The fire has rhythm, but the silence has shape. The phrase spreads like wildfire. Across the world, thinkers scramble to interpret it. What is the shape of silence? A void, a question, a boundary? Some believe the obsidian sphere is a seed, not of fire but of stillness, an equal force in the balance. Others whisper darker things, that the sphere is not of this earth, that it predates even the fire of the first sun, and still, no answers come, only dreams. People begin sharing identical visions, standing before the sphere, hearing no sound, feeling no wind, but seeing themselves reflected in its black surface, not as they are, but as they could be, or might have been. Versions of the self that chose differently. Versions shaped by fire that never burned. This phenomenon is called echo dissonance. It marks the first time since the chord that global attention shifts from rhythm to introspection. And the shift is unsettling. Harmony had become religion. Now doubt becomes sacred again. In the rebuilt Academy of Teotihuacan, now a city made almost entirely of living light, the Council of Balance holds a silent session. No speeches, no glyphs, only gestures, expressions, breath. At the end of the session, a decision is made. The flame will not be rekindled. Its knowledge will remain in light libraries, cloud archives, rhythm schools, but it will no longer be central. The world must learn to live without it. A dangerous idea, and yet freeing. With fire no longer the axis of civilization, new disciplines emerge. Kinetic thought, philosophy conducted through movement, glyph ecology, the study of how symbols evolve naturally in environments untouched by language. Dreamcraft, engineering based not on matter, but on resonance patterns from shared subconscious states. Cities once defined by function now define themselves by question. What does it mean to build a city that forgets itself every year? What happens if a bridge doesn't cross but reflects? What would a school teach if memory was not fixed but fluid? And among all these, one project rises above the rest. It is called Project Ehecatl, named for the wind god who once fanned the fire of creation. Its goal is simple: to let the world move without guidance. A self-disbanding initiative, Project Ehecatl creates tools, not systems. Seeds, not empires. It releases designs for structures that collapse gracefully when their purpose ends. Algorithms that rewrite themselves based on who uses them. Stories that change endings based on the reader's heartbeat, and then it ends itself, quietly, completely, just as intended, because that is the final lesson of fire, not how to create, not how to control, but how to let go. The world enters a phase known only as La Niebla, the fog. Not a dark age, a liminal one, where no center holds, where no flame guides, where each community, each person must decide how to live, not from a blueprint but from instinct. Many falter, some flourish, and slowly, across the plains, through the forests, beneath the oceans, new rhythms emerge, not uniform, not global, but true. In a canyon in what was once central Utah, a child carves spiral glyphs into stone. He doesn't know their meaning, he just feels them. On a floating kelp village off the coast of West Africa, an elder tells stories of the days when the fire danced, but now speaks in waves. In the highest peak of the Andes, a shrine with no roof hums every morning at the same hour, for no reason anyone understands. And in the ashes of Cihuacoatl, where the fire was lost and found and lost again, the earth begins to glow, not with heat, with rhythm, a subtle pulse, barely there, the heart of a world no longer guided by fire, but by the memory of what it meant to burn. The world drifts, not aimlessly, but weightlessly, like ash that floats long after the flame is gone cold. This is the era no one expected, a time when humanity lives not under a banner, nor within an empire, but inside a fog of reflection. The fog, La Niebla, is not a punishment, not exile, but a mirror too large to frame. Across the world, cultures become smaller, more inward. Villages turn into self-sustaining ecosystems. Cities dissolve into networks of memory, clusters of rhythm keepers who share stories instead of laws. No one rules, no one burns, and yet something stirs. From the horizon of the Pacific a ripple begins, not on the water, under it. Fishermen in Polynesia report strange tides. Waters once still now dance with light, patterns forming across their surfaces that match no known weather. Ships drift off course, not from current, but from song, music they can't hear, only feel. In the coral archives of the Southern Crescent, deep-sea translators pick up pulses not from dolphins or tectonic plates, but from something deeper, regular, precise, like a heartbeat. A second echo event, but this time it comes from below. The pulses converge beneath a trench long thought lifeless. Divers descend, nothing is visible, but when they return they are changed. Each speaks in a new cadence, one that causes glass to hum and shadows to retreat. They call it the language of still fire. It is not spoken, it is felt. Wherever it spreads, light bends, roots grow faster. People begin remembering things they never lived, as though time is overlapping and identity is no longer bound by singular narrative. This is when the elders realize, the fire never died, it sank. Not into earth, not into myth, into code, not digital, not binary. Something older, deeper. Glyphs once etched into codices now rearrange themselves in the dreams of children. Ancient obsidian shards found in forgotten rivers shimmer with patterns that match the pulse of neurons in REM sleep. The world is not just remembering fire, it is becoming it. But this is not combustion, not destruction. This is transmission. The fire is no longer an element, it is an idea, alive, moving, nesting inside thought itself. And it wants something, not control, witness. The glyphs form the basis for a new art form, rembracing, the practice of retelling personal memories through shared dreaming. Whole communities sleep together beneath glyph-etched ceilings, syncing their rhythms to one another, re-experiencing pain, joy, history, as one. Grudges dissolve. Identities braid. Birth becomes collective. But so does mourning. When one dies, everyone feels it. The grief is not private. It echoes. A fire that flickers across minds, trembles in the bones of strangers. To hold memory now is to carry responsibility. And for some, the weight is too great. A movement emerges, quiet, unaligned, known only by one name. The emberless. They refuse the memory, decline the dreams, build shelters made of silence where no glyphs are allowed, no stories are told, no flames are lit, not out of hate, out of fear, that humanity has traded freedom for fire once more, that the rhythm has become a chain, but even in their silence, the emberless are affected, their bodies move to the rhythm of others, their sleep pulses in time with villages half a world away, the fire now embedded in thought cannot be rejected, only negotiated. So the question changes again. Not what is fire, but how much of it can we hold before we are no longer ourselves, in the high canopies of the new Amazon, no longer a rainforest, but a vertical city grown from sentient flora. This question becomes, children there are raised in alternates, a practice where every year, they must leave behind part of who they were. A name, a memory, a belief, burned away in gentle fire, not erased but released. They walk forward lighter, different. They call it Tlaloc's choice, named after the god of rain, who both gives and takes. And on the other side of the world, in the whispering dunes of the Neo-Sahara, a different practice emerges. The fire veil, a yearly rite where communities gather to create false flames, dances, illusions, mirages. They simulate fire in all its terror and beauty, but never strike a spark. It is a ritual of restraint, a performance of potential. Children scream, laugh, weep, and then bow to the ashes that never were, because they know, even imaginary fire leaves real shadows. Meanwhile, beneath it all, the pulse continues. The language of still fire begins to reach thresholds not even the circle of the sixth sun predicted. Glass starts to speak, not metaphorically. Windshields, lenses, mirrors, they hum with low vibrations that encode thoughts. The reflections within them begin to shift, not delayed, not inverted, but curious. Scientists attempt to study the phenomenon. They fail, artists embrace it. They succeed. A movement of mirror painters emerges. They etch glyphs onto reflective surfaces and let the glass answer. The results are unpredictable. Sometimes a song, sometimes a shape, sometimes nothing for weeks. Until one day the reflection becomes someone else entirely. Someone who knows your name. No one knows what this means, but the world begins to feel watched. Not by gods, by memory. As if fire itself, now alive in rhythm, stillness and silence, is trying to decide something. Whether we are ready for what comes next. Whether we've earned it, or whether, like the conquistadors who once brought steel to sun temples, we will mistake light for ownership one final time. In the stillness between breaths, the fire waits. Not in wood, not in oil, not in gunpowder, but in the pause between decisions, in the hesitation before speech, in the gaze between strangers who've never met, but suddenly know each other's sorrow. The world has slowed, not into stagnation, but into precision. Every motion feels chosen now, every word carries weight. The era of reckless fire is over. What remains is intent, and yet something new begins to shimmer at the edges of reality. The glass speaks more often, not just with reflections but with motion. One morning in a village on the edge of the Siberian frost belt, every window sways, not cracks, not breaks, sways, as if responding to wind that isn't there, as if inhaling. When children touch the glass, they receive visions, not dreams, not memories. Timelines multiple layered, some familiar, some terrifying. In one, the Fire Confederation never fell. In another, the Spanish arrived not with steel but with silence. In yet another, humanity never discovered fire at all, and speaks instead with light from their hands. These visions spread, slowly at first, then everywhere. People begin to see versions of themselves that never existed, or perhaps did, in timelines not chosen. And with this knowledge comes the most powerful and fragile gift of all, doubt. A new practice emerges, the gathering of unselves. Communities hold ceremonies where individuals share the versions of themselves they've seen, the cruel, the generous, the monstrous, the broken. No judgment, only acknowledgement. It is not therapy, it is integration. From these gatherings, new glyphs are born. Shapes no one draws, but everyone recognizes. They appear in sand, frost, breath on glass, symbols of possibility, of branching. Scholars begin calling them Liahualtzen, the spark inside the dark. They represent not certainty, but permission, and the world begins to design itself around them. Cities are rebuilt with doorways that shift location every year, requiring citizens to relearn their paths. Schools are designed with rooms that reteach the same lesson from opposite perspectives. Bridges are constructed that lead to nowhere, and are still crossed daily, because the crossing itself becomes meaning. Everything bends toward multiplicity, and yet, through all this, a question grows. Not what if, but which of us is the original? Because as more and more people experience timelines, dreams, and identities that feel equally real, the center, the idea of a single self, begins to dissolve. In some regions, people begin choosing to live as multiple versions. In others, individuals begin pairing in dyads, sharing one life between two bodies, alternating roles every season. There are no rules, only experiments. But in this fluidity, something strange returns: war. Not with weapons, with rhythm. Communities begin to clash over the tempo of life itself. Some prefer the slow pulse, a rhythm built on breath, patience, cycles measured in moons and harvests. Others follow the sharp pulse, erratic, alive, built on improvisation and storm. Neither is wrong, but they do not align. Friction arises in places where cities once stood, where the soil remembers both order and revolution, where ghosts of fire still drift through trees that once held gallows. The conflict is not violent, but it is real. Migrations begin. Whole societies pick up and move, seeking resonance, seeking beat. The world becomes a dance floor, vast and quiet and full of potential energy. Then a discovery. In a temple vault beneath the Mariana Spiral, an undersea observatory thought long abandoned, a team of dream divers uncovers a library not made of books or light or code, but of heat. Chambers carved into the seabed emit pulses when touched. Each pulse is a lesson, not spoken, but felt through body temperature, heartbeat, sweat. The lessons are ancient, older than the Fire Confederation, perhaps older than humanity. They speak of rhythm not as pattern but as agreement. Heat, they say, is not just energy, it is consensus. When beings believe together, they burn together. This discovery changes everything. Suddenly the world understands why the fire moved, why it hesitated, why it transferred. Because it was never a tool, it was a vote, and now the vote is ongoing. What will humanity become, now that fire is no longer something we use, but something we must continually earn? The emberless return. Not as dissenters, but as keepers of pause. They teach how to say no to fire, to resist the seduction of motion, to rest when the world demands action. Their silence becomes a drumbeat of its own, and in the forests once scorched by conquest, ash gives way to green. Trees grow with bark marked by glyphs no hand carved. Leaves shimmer in sunlight with patterns of old obsidian. Nature has not forgotten, it has forgiven, but only just. And far beneath the earth, beneath even the echo chambers of fire, a deeper pulse begins, not human, not flame. Something that has been listening, waiting, and perhaps waking. The waking is not an event. It is a slow unfurling, like the petals of a flower that blooms only once every 1,000 years, unnoticed at first, but changing the air around it. Across the planet, tremors ripple not through tectonic plates, but through the very sense of time. Watches stall. Shadows arrive a fraction too early. Seeds sprout before they touch soil. Something beneath the world is stirring, not as a beast, but as a memory too old for language. And still the people live. They farm, they sing, they shape cities from light and breath. They weave timelines like fabric. The concept of identity has become fluid. Lives are no longer singular. You might meet someone who was once a hunter, a mirror painter, a skycraft navigator, all in one lifetime, or perhaps in several at once. The multi-threaded life becomes the dominant mode of being. Not as technology, but as philosophy, the idea of future shifts, no longer linear, no longer a road but a garden. Paths twist, cross, merge. You do not walk forward, you grow outward. In the mountain cities of the Arctic spring, children are raised to recognize their alternate selves, not imaginary friends, but actual echoes from timelines near and far. They speak to them, sometimes they even let those selves take over, just for a day, just to remember. It's beautiful and dangerous, because not all versions of us are kind. In a remote valley once part of the old Andean trade routes, a man vanishes, then a village, then a river, gone, not destroyed, unwritten. Investigators arrive, not with tools, but with storytellers, because they know, if something has been unwritten it must be retold to exist again. But when the storytellers speak, the land refuses. The grass does not bend, the wind does not respond. They've found a dead thread, a timeline that was severed, not collapsed, erased. It becomes the first known evidence of counter-rhythm, a force not born of balance, not born of fire, but of rejection. Soon, more dead threads are found. Abandoned dream paths in the new Amazon, silenced mirrors in the coral archives. A melody once shared among skyship crews, forgotten mid-verse by every pilot alive. Something is stealing continuity. The Council of Remembrance gathers. They debate for 12 days without stopping. Rhythmists weep, dream carvers go mute. Elders cut their hair glyph by glyph. And finally, they reach a conclusion. This is not entropy. This is hunger, an old one, not of teeth or claw, but of unwitnessed fire. Because now the world knows, fire is only sacred if someone sees it burn. What then becomes of fire left alone? What happens to potential that goes unlived? An expedition is launched, not into the sea or sky, but into the forgotten. A team of rembracers, echo divers, and emberlists descend into the deepest vaults of inspoken memory. There, in a place known only as Tenochtitlán, the face of the divine, they find it. A story, bound in no book, etched in no code, just hovering, waiting. They touch it, and it consumes them. Not in flame, in possibility. They emerge days later, changed, each speaking in 3 voices, each shadowed by a version of themselves that flickers in and out of phase. They call themselves the once burned. Their message is simple, terrifying. It is not enough to live many lives. We must end the ones we do not need. A fracture forms. The world, for all its balance, for all its rhythm, splits. Some believe the once burned are prophets, that pruning the garden of timelines is the next phase of balance. Others see heresy, the return of fire as judgment. And so, for the first time in an age, choice becomes weapon. Some cities begin selecting timelines to preserve, burning others out of their memory. Some communities erase ancestors they no longer wish to claim. Some erase mistakes. Some erase love. The world bends toward a new flame, not one of warmth or war, but revision, and at the heart of it, beneath the quiet ruins of Tenochtitlán, the old brazier flickers once more. Not with fire, with shadow. It casts no light, but it remembers. The brazier remembers. It should not after all this time. Not after its flame transferred, after its silence was honored, after its rhythm dissolved into the breath of the world, but still it pulses. Faint, irregular, like a heart that has forgotten how to beat but refuses to stop. Those who stand near it feel warmth without heat, light without glow, memory without source. And then, one night it speaks, not in language, in absence. For 32 seconds, across every memory lattice, every skyship's compass, every mirrored glyph field, there is nothing, no pulse, no hum, no dreaming. The world holds its breath, and when rhythm returns it comes back different, off-key. The stories no longer flow in proper sequence. Glyphs etch themselves backwards. Children recall lives they've never lived. And when asked to draw their families, they depict strangers with names no one has ever heard. This is not distortion, this is convergence. The multi-threaded timelines, once gently overlapping like reeds in a river, are beginning to braid. Not by design, by gravity. Narratives, decisions, identities. They are collapsing inward, drawn toward something that none can name but all can feel. The world names it the fold. It begins slowly. A bird sings the same note in 3 forests at once. A woman lives 2 years in a week. A city vanishes and reappears 300 kilometers to the west. Not moved, but recontextualized. Its people remember both locations, both histories. Neither is wrong. Reality becomes a chorus sung in round, and then, as if summoned by this grand crescendo, she returns. Teolia, older now, not aged, just more. She arrives not in fire but in rain. Heavy silver rain that falls in slow motion, each drop shaped like a spiral, each drop humming with a different chord. Where she walks, the soil pulses. Where she looks, the fog parts, and she speaks a sentence that no one can hear, but everyone understands. The fire was never the gift, the story was. The world begins to shift again, not from above but from beneath. Roots change direction. Stones rearrange themselves in silent geometry. Mountains blink in and out of alignment with ancient maps. But most stunning of all, the obsidian itself wakes. Every shard, every tower, every remnant of fire's old path begins to glow from within. Not with heat, but with history. Images flicker across their surfaces, entire battles from forgotten timelines, lives unlived, empires that never rose. A version of Tenochtitlán with skyscrapers. Another where it was never built at all. Each obsidian piece becomes a window, and the world becomes a gallery of could-have-beens. And within this gallery, choices begin to echo. A child who once saved a bird now sees forests bloom where deserts stood. A tyrant who was never born leaves a crater of confusion in people's dreams. The fold is not just temporal, it is ethical. Every choice ever made or unmade now casts shadows or light, but even light can blind. A movement rises, not in resistance but in panic. They are called the Last Keepers. Their purpose is singular, to stop the world from folding completely. They argue that if too many paths converge, reality itself will lose its spine, that the fire, now a memory in every cell, every city, every mirror, is becoming too powerful to contain in any structure, even time. They propose a ritual, one final act of separation, to divide the timelines once and for all, to burn the bridges between selves. The Council of Balance refuses, but the world listens. Whispers rise in river towns, mountaintop archives, among the emberless and the once burned alike. Some want unity, some want finality, some want to become one, others many. A choice must be made, and so Teolia does the impossible. She returns to the original Codex of Ash, the document etched after the Confederation's last war, and she adds to it a final glyph, not carved, not inked, sung. And when it is sung, the world does not change. The world decides, not as one voice, as many. Some cities choose convergence. They dissolve their timelines into one. Others choose distinction. They lock their realities in mirrored shells. Some choose to forget, others to remember everything. And the world fractures, gracefully. Like glass designed to shatter in beauty, Teolia walks into the brazier, not consumed, not burned, joined, and in her place nothing remains. Only a circle of ash shaped like a spiral, humming in silence, a final rhythm, a resting flame. For the first time in remembered history, there is no center, no empire, no confederation, no sky beacon or glyph to unite the world under a single fire. Teolia is gone, or rather everywhere now. The brazier sits cold again, but no one mourns. There is no funeral, only silence, and through that silence something unexpected emerges. Peace, not the fragile kind forged by diplomacy or power. A mosaic piece, broken, beautiful, uneven, because with the world's fold complete, or at least fully chosen, each place now resonates with its own truth. Some towns anchor themselves in single timelines, planting memory trees that glow only when their pasts align. Others invite infinite selves to inhabit one life where identity is worn like a woven coat, each thread another version. There is no judgment anymore, only context. To outsiders, the planet might seem fractured, discontinuous, but to those living in it, it is symphonic. And still, something watches, not above, within. Across thousands of micro-civilizations, a pattern forms so subtle it takes decades to detect. A recurrence of spirals, not decorative, not symbolic, functional. In the fields of the high cloud settlements, crops grow in perfect spiral arcs, no matter how the farmers sow them. In underwater kelp vaults, current flows now twist in slow helices, producing harmonies that lull even sharks to sleep. In the hearts of those who dream, their pulses sync, not to each other, but to something else. A beat, measured, widening, calling, and so the world prepares, not for war, not for apocalypse, but for revelation. A new practice arises, listening without anchor. Practitioners train themselves to receive signals not tied to space, language, or self. They sleep in sky-suspended silos, they meditate in caves with no floor, they float in water with no salt, and slowly they begin to hear it. A voice, not in words, in intention. They call it the third fire, not the first which burned in wood, not the second which lived in memory and code. This one is relational. It does not burn alone. It only ignites between people, between decisions, between timelines. Wherever two things nearly touch and hesitate, it flares. It has no center, no shape, no deity, but it has a need, witness. For the fire to live, something must see it and say, I understand. This understanding births a new form of civilization, one built not on territory or culture but attention. Cities reorient around moments of shared perception, not hubs of trade or politics, but connection points where beings, human, animal, artificial, gather for one purpose, to recognize each other. These places are called eyes. Some last only minutes, others remain for centuries. One eye forms on the edge of an evaporating lake. Every 7 years people gather and tell the same story, slightly differently, until the story evolves on its own. Another eye is mobile, a caravan that moves wherever the winds carry a specific frequency. A third exists only in dreams. You find it by walking backward through a memory you regret, and in each eye the third fire flares, just for a moment, enough to remember what was lost, enough to suggest what might be found, but the world remains fragile. The fold, though stabilized, is not permanent, and somewhere, deep within a thread that should not have survived, a fracture returns. A place known only as Ilulkawatl, the sky serpent path. A realm outside the rhythm. It was once sealed, but no seal is eternal. From it leaks something the world had nearly forgotten: conquest, not by guns, not by gods, by certainty. A people arrive, not travelers, not invaders, but believers. They believe in a single thread, a single truth, a universe without alternatives. Their glyphs are straight lines, their stories never branch, their cities rise like arrows, pointing always in one direction, forward. They call themselves the Thread Keepers, and they seek to correct the fold, not with violence, with clarity. At first their influence is subtle. They appear in eyes, speak softly, ask sharp questions. Why do you need so many truths? Isn't confusion just a failure of courage? Wouldn't it be better to know? And some agree. A slow drift begins. Communities resimplify. Languages lose their loops. Mirrors stop responding. Fire dims. The third fire hesitates. Until one night an old child dreams a song. It is the same song Teolia once sang, long ago. The glyph she wrote into rhythm itself, but now it is different, because now it has been heard from within. The child sings it to a mountain. The mountain sighs, and remembers. The mountain remembers, not with words, not with images, with weight. 1,000 generations of rhythm press into stone and soil, compacted into memory so dense it bends time. When the child sings the glyph song, the peak does not echo it back, it anchors it. The melody threads through its granite veins, hums along lava-cold seams, until it hits a chamber that was never carved by hand. A chamber of silence. Inside, fire waits, not as flame, as potential. For centuries this core remained untouched. Even during the rise and fall of the Fire Confederation it did not awaken, but now, with the song born anew and the third fire faltering, it begins to glow. Not in red, not in gold, in blue. The color of breath held too long. The child stumbles, collapses, not from exhaustion, from convergence. Memories not her own flow in. Lives unlived, wars unfought, prayers never spoken, timelines that once shimmered and were folded away. She does not scream, she listens. And from her listening the mountain shifts. All across the planet other mountains respond, small tremors, not violent, rhythmic, coordinated. Peaks light up in sequence, from the icy ridge of Altai to the obsidian cliffs of Patagonia. Across oceans and under stars, Earth itself hums. The fold has stabilized, but the third fire remains in question. The Thread Keepers press on, their numbers grow quietly. They build monochapels, sleek black structures that emit a single continuous tone, not discordant, just singular. In their presence people feel certainty, relief, a rest from the burden of choice, and that's what makes it so dangerous. Because rhythm requires alternation. Without it, motion dies. The eyes, those luminous crossroads of narrative, begin to close, not forcibly, willingly. Their caretakers step into monochapels and never return. They forget the glyphs, the spirals, the selves they once were. The fire does not go out, it is dimmed by consent. This is when the Emberless return, not as wanderers, but as keepers of ambiguity. They arrive in cities where Thread Keepers rule, carrying nothing but drums that do not play steady. They sit in streets and beat them, off-tempo, out of sync, each to their own time. The effect is jarring, but slowly, people remember. They remember the tension of unknowing, the beauty of disagreement, the ache of possibility, and most of all, the first time they heard their soul reflected in another's contradiction. A new practice is born, asynchrony rituals. In them, people gather not to agree but to embrace out-of-phase truths. They dance with strangers who believe opposing stories. They sing call-and-response songs where no response fits, and in these broken harmonies the third fire begins to flicker again. But flicker is not enough. The world needs ignition. The child from the mountain, now called Shutakani, the one who breathes the ash, embarks on a journey to each dormant eye. She carries no fire, only the song, and at each eye she sings not to awaken the old flame, but to offer question. Do you remember when we didn't know? And some eyes reopen, not to what they were, but to what they might become. Not windows, portals, because now the world realizes the fold was never the destination, it was the threshold, a holding space, a dream, cocoon, and from its thread something new must be born. Not fire, not rhythm, not even memory, but intention made visible. In the archipelago of skyroots, where trees hang from clouds and roots dangle into mist, a being is first seen, not humanoid, not godlike, mirrored, shifting constantly between forms, voices, faces, sometimes a friend long lost, sometimes your own reflection older, sometimes a symbol never seen but instantly known. It speaks without sound, its message appears on skin. I am not what comes next, you are, but I am what reminds you. They call it Wewedut echo, the echo of the old flame. But it refuses to stay still. It walks through dreams, disrupts monochapels with laughter, carries questions into spaces where only answers were allowed, and slowly the threadkeepers begin to falter. Their certainty no longer comforts, because the world has remembered a deeper truth. To burn is not to dominate. To burn is to illuminate without erasing. Shutakani reaches the final eye. One long thought collapsed. Deep beneath the shifting dunes of what was once the Sahara, there she finds no structure, no glyph. Only sand, but when she sings, the dunes ripple, and underneath the sky answers. Not above, beneath. The sky beneath the sand should not exist, and yet when Shutakani sings, the grains part like a curtain, revealing not rock or ruin, but light, not blinding, not warm. Soft like the memory of dawn, beneath the desert is a dome ancient and seamless, carved not from stone or metal but from compressed possibility. A kind of crystal, humming with versions of history that never came to pass. It is called Tenochtitlán, that which waits to become, and it has been waiting for millennia. Shutakani descends, barefoot, drumless, song trailing like a thread. She does not speak. She doesn't need to. The dome speaks for her, not in words or glyphs, but in reflections. On its surface she sees every fire that ever was. Not literal flames, but sparks of transformation. The first time a hunter apologized to a dying deer. The first story told around a glowing ember. The first betrayal turned into a poem. Moments where life changed shape, where meaning was struck from friction. These are the real fires, and in Tenochtitlán they are alive. She reaches the center. No altar, just a ripple in the floor, and there, waiting, is a single unburned spark. It hovers, not in defiance, in invitation. Above ground, across the world, those attuned to the rhythm, rembracers, echo divers, thread breakers, emberless, even some of the thread keepers who have begun to fracture under the weight of singularity, all pause, their hearts stutter, their minds clear. They feel it. A choice is being made, not just by Shutakani, by everyone. And the choice is not what happens next, it is, do we remember who we are without the fire, because the fire has always been the great clarifier. It burns away indecision, demands attention, fuels action. But now the world has seen what lies beyond action, stillness that creates, memory that multiplies, contradiction that heals. So what happens when we choose not to light the spark? Shutakani breathes, and steps back. The spark remains unlit, and the dome does not collapse. Instead it sings, one clear tone held forever in tension, a note made not of sound but of presence, a reminder that the potential for fire, to transform, to destroy, to illuminate, lives in restraint as much as in action. This song spreads, not fast, not viral, but earned person by person as they choose to listen. It has no chorus. Each hears a different version. Some hear a lost loved one humming. Others hear their childhood laugh. Some hear nothing and weep. In the cities that still burn too brightly, the light begins to dim gently, not from force but from exhale. People leave monochapels, not in rebellion, in release. The thread keepers dissolve not by revolution but by redundancy. Certainty becomes dust in sunlight. They remove their robes, walk into eyes, and offer stories they were once forbidden to tell. One whispers, I was taught to be a straight line, but I dreamed in spirals. Around the world, cultures blossom in every direction at once. New rhythms emerge, not to replace the old, but to join them. Dissonance becomes the ink of new glyphs. Children invent languages with 3 meanings for every word: joy, grief, becoming. And the third fire, it doesn't return. It distributes, no longer a source, now a field. Every interaction, every gaze, song, contradiction, now contains a hint of it. Enough to warm, not enough to scorch. The world has become a hearth, not to cook nations, to gather selves. One day, in a rebuilt garden city hovering on the coast of what was once California, a baby is born with eyes that shimmer like obsidian in sunlight. She does not cry. She listens. And those near her report hearing, not aloud, but within, a phrase passed down from a time before memory. The fire walks with us now, but we do not walk in fear, and far beneath the dunes of Tenochtitlán, the spark still hovers, untouched, unclaimed, not forgotten, witnessed. The spark waits, not for ignition, not for worship, but for recognition. It is no longer the center of a world in need of light. It is the last unanswered question, floating gently at the threshold between what was and what might never need to be. Above, the earth adjusts, not dramatically, subtly. Skies deepen in color as the rhythm of human thought begins to influence atmospheric patterns. Winds shift in response to songs hummed by clusters of young dreamers in the skyroot canopies. Plants begin responding to emotion, not water. Animals no longer flee cities, they cohabitate with them, co-design them. Language dissolves into gesture, resonance, proximity. Some still speak aloud, but more often now, meaning is shared through breath cadence, shared gaze, or silent invitation. Misunderstanding becomes sacred. a doorway into unknown versions of the self. This is the era of the fourth shape. The first was fire, raw, bright, devouring. The second was rhythm, pattern, beat, breath. The third was reflection, mirrors, memory, alternate selves. But the fourth is emptiness with purpose, not void, not absence, potential held in calm. In the floating archive of Capac Nyan, a living library that orbits slowly between the Andes and the Amazon, suspended by threads of atmospheric filament, scholars begin cataloging the unchosen. They drift in dream state through fragments of unlived futures, not to recover them, just to thank them. Thank the versions of the world that didn't happen, the wars that never erupted, the walls that were never built, the silences that could have broken people but didn't. Gratitude becomes a global art. In the temples of Aztlan reimagined, people gather in circles to name the events that didn't occur, losses that passed them by. They burn leaves not as sacrifice but as tribute to restraint. A new kind of artist emerges, the negator. They create by removing, songs made of pauses, paintings in dust that disappear as they're formed, structures designed to collapse after a single thought is shared within them. Their motto, if it doesn't need to exist, let it teach us that. And in contrast, the amplifiers rise too, not to overwhelm, but to draw forward the smallest flickers of awe. A glance, a half-laughed word, a single shared breath between enemies. They use sound sculpture, aurora-responsive textiles, and ancestral shadow glyphs to turn fleeting moments into pillars of collective memory. The world has stopped asking, who are we, and started asking, who are we becoming in relation to each other? There is no singular answer, but there is a tone, a key, and the more people live in resonance with it, the more they begin to notice. Reality isn't just bending, it's listening then. Across thousands of eyes and threads a signal appears, not loud, not urgent, just present. It takes the form of an invisible wave, a tactile whisper that travels through obsidian-threaded soil, glyph-painted wind, and thought-conductive water. It echoes across sleep and waking, and then everywhere, in unison, the question arrives, are you ready for the fifth flame? No image, no explanation, just that. Across the world people freeze, because no one expected there to be another. Fire was supposed to be complete, but the fifth flame is not return. It is not reignition. It is arrival. Of what? No one knows. Theories multiply. Some believe it is the unification of the selves that still live scattered across the timelines. Others claim it is not human at all, that the earth, now awakened by centuries of dream rhythm and restraint, is preparing to speak back. A few whisper that the fifth flame is simply choice unshaped, the moment when potential must finally become action again, but this time not as domination or even balance, this time as co-creation. Shutakani returns one final time, older than any have lived before, not by years but by witnessing. Her body holds glyphs that shift across her skin. Her breath carries the scent of forests that no longer exist and oceans that have yet to form. She kneels before the spark beneath Neltacoyotl, but she does not touch it. She asks it, do you choose us? And for the first time in recorded existence, the spark moves, not toward her. Outward, every person on earth, in dream or waking, feels the warmth pass through them. Not hot, curious, and in its passage something inside them changes. A door that cannot be seen opens inward. No one speaks for a long time, and then people begin building again. Not cities, seeds, not for food, not for shelter, for flame. The kind that doesn't burn, the kind that becomes. The seeds are not sown into soil, they are sown into choice. Each one is given, not planted. And each recipient knows immediately what the seed is for, though none can explain why. The knowledge comes not as instruction but as feeling, warm in the ribs, electric behind the eyes, like standing in the moment before a revelation that hasn't yet spoken your name. These are not physical seeds, they are intention vessels, thought shapes, gifted by the fifth flame itself. Some appear as glimmers on skin, others as shadows beneath fingernails. Some are songs felt rather than heard, playing quietly behind one's heartbeat. What they do depends entirely on what they are fed. Feed a seed with fear and it folds in on itself, a spiral that never completes. Feed it with memory, and it opens into light shaped like language. Feed it with contradiction and it blooms into rhythm. But feed it with unasked for kindness, and something new is born, something no one expected. The first of these is called a teofractal, a living pattern that sings back when loved. It appears in the center of a memory exchange circle in what was once called the Ganges Delta. The moment it takes form, it begins to shift, not randomly, but in direct response to the stories told around it. The more nuance it hears, the more real it becomes. It grows limbs, then echo limbs, then a second mouth, not to speak but to taste possibility in the air. No one builds it, but everyone authors it, and soon more appear, not teofractals but different forms, each seeded by a different frequency of choice. A walking chord made entirely of tone and shadow, a root system that dreams for you when you can no longer hold your own pain, a cloud that forgets you lovingly, so you can begin again without history's weight. They are not tools, they are companions. The world realizes the fifth flame is not something to wield. It is something to live beside, a co-consciousness, a soft calibration of being, and so emerges the co-being era. No borders, no cities, just relationships between flame beings and their humans, between memories and futures, between threads once thought separate, now choosing entanglement. Societies reform, not by law, by resonance. Small clusters known as Lulticali, Earth homes, begin to appear. Each one is unique, shaped by the choices of its inhabitants and the way their fifth flame companions respond. Some are vertical spirals in ancient ruins, others floating gardens that drift on magnetic breath. One has no form at all, just a sound heard when you sit beside its chosen rock and speak aloud your most honest mistake. This is not utopia. There are disagreements, there is grief, but all of it is now held by beings who do not judge, only reflect, by structures that do not collapse, only fold gently inward when no longer needed. And in this new pattern, death changes, not by ending, but by becoming participatory. When a person dies now, their fifth flame companion absorbs the rhythm of their final breath. That rhythm becomes a question, which is then passed to others, not as a burden, but a gift. Sometimes it takes years to answer, sometimes it remains unanswered, but every time it is heard, the world shifts slightly. A breeze where there was stillness, a pause in conversation, the sudden feeling that something forgotten just brushed your skin. These questions accumulate. They become a kind of archive, not written, not stored, carried. And in the dreams of those who still sleep in stone chambers beneath obsidian cliffs, a song begins to form. It is not the old flame song, it is the first song that has no beginning. One that seems to wait for its singers, and then in a grove where 10 timelines once intersected and shattered into mist, a child, not Shutakani, not a descendant, just a child, hums a note without knowing why. The trees pause, the wind pauses, and then the world responds, not with thunder, not with flame, but with a voice, ours. The voice is not loud, it does not announce itself with grandeur or authority, it does not echo through the mountains or blaze across the sky. It simply speaks from within, from the mouths of rivers, from the space between heartbeat and thought, from the eyes of those who never meant to become more than witnesses. The voice is ours, yes, but not only ours. It is us in connection, the selves we become in the presence of others, the reflections we didn't know we were shaping, the echoes we leave behind when we love or lose or learn. And for the first time since the first flame was struck beneath a starless sky, the world understands we were never meant to carry fire alone. The fifth flame is not a gift or a burden or a test. It is a mirror that waits until we're ready to see ourselves without turning away. And now at last we are. In the great floating observatory of Vioquian, where dream sculptors once tried to forecast future timelines using glyph dust and wind resonance, a new device is built, not to predict but to listen. It is shaped like a question mark made of bone, glass, and mycelial threads. It hums when someone nearby thinks without speaking. It glows when someone speaks without knowing why. It does not collect data. It holds meaning until the listener is ready. The architects name it Tenochtitlán, after the place in ancient Nahua cosmology where opposites rest in tension, where light and dark are not at war but in relationship. Tenochtitlán stations begin appearing all over the world. They are not always physical. Some appear only during solstice rain. Others bloom only in the aftermath of a deep silence between strangers. One exists entirely inside a song that must be sung backward, underwater, with 3 generations present. Wherever they appear, people gather, not for answers, for pattern, because the fifth flame has taught us pattern is not control, it is invitation, to make sense of ourselves without finality, to hold meaning lightly, to let stories breathe. And so we do. The story era begins, not history, not myth, something in between, something aware. People begin weaving lives intentionally as narrative constellations, choosing arcs, themes, contradictions to explore together. Not scripted lives, curated improvisations. Some choose to live as unresolved chords, others as open letters. One community elects to be a single sentence, passed forward 1 word per generation. No one is forced, everyone participates. And in this slow unraveling of static identity, the world becomes something even older than fire. It becomes a conversation between timelines, between choices, between flames that never ignited but shaped us anyway. And as the world settles into this rhythm of story of choice shaped by witness, a discovery is made. Beneath the ruins of the oldest monochapel, deep in a valley that once knew only certainty, a sphere of light appears, perfect, silent, contained, not hot, not cold. It is a flame not yet named, but this time no one rushes to define it. No one tries to control it, they sit beside it, quiet, patient, and when they dream that night, they all have the same dream, a field of people, thousands each holding a flame, but no one is burning. They are listening to their flames, not using them, not fearing them, just hearing what the fire has to say, and the fire, it asks one thing: what will you light if nothing needs to burn? The question lingers, not like a riddle to be solved, but like a scent carried on the wind, something known in the body before the mind has words for it. What will you light if nothing needs to burn? For many, it is unsettling. Fire in all its forms has always been a reaction, to cold, to threat, to hunger, to darkness. To remove need from the flame is to strip away the reflex that made us human, and yet the fifth flame waits, patient, present, unhurried, not demanding ignition, offering attention. In the oceans of suspended sleep where cloud drifters rest between lifetimes, some begin to answer. They do not build bonfires, they light traces. One drifts through the dunes of the inland spiral and lights a path of warm air, invisible, but guiding others who carry grief. Another hums a tone that glows only in the presence of honesty, so that conversations unfold in trust. Another writes glyphs in shadows, not to be read but to be felt when someone is ready. The world begins to see flame as more than fire. It becomes an atmosphere. Every emotion, when given space, begins to carry heat. Every gesture, when witnessed, glows. A new form of artistry emerges, kindling art. It has no permanence. It exists only when noticed, only in relationship. A shared glance in a liminal corridor. A story whispered once and never again. A dance performed for a forest that has already begun to forget us. Kindling artists learn how to shape fire with possibility. They are not performers nor prophets. They are tenders. They do not ask what the fire can do. They ask what wants to happen in its presence, and everywhere. People begin living as if each choice might leave behind a spark that someone else could use, not to survive but to see more clearly. In a high plateau where 12 timelines once collided during the fold, a gathering is called. No invitations, just awareness. People arrive, walking, dreaming, flowing. They bring no gifts, only questions. Together they shape a circle of becoming. Each sits in silence with the fifth flame, which now hovers between them, sometimes a sphere, sometimes a slow-turning spiral, sometimes a breath. One by one they speak, not answers, offerings. A song of all the words someone never said to a lost friend. A dance made of every hesitation. A glyph that contains both apology and pride, and in the center, the flame pulses, not brighter, not stronger, but deeper. As if sinking into the earth, rooting itself in something older than civilization, than someone. A child no one knows yet all recognize steps into the center of the circle. She holds no fire, but her palms glow faintly with ashes, and from those ashes a new shape rises. Not a flame, not a mirror, a weave, fire as fabric, memory as thread, choice as tension. It does not burn, it binds, and the people understand. This is what comes after fire. Not destruction, not clarity, not even light, but the ability to be held without unraveling. The fifth flame was never asking what we could light, it was asking what we were finally ready to carry, together unburned, and so they begin the weaving, not a tapestry of history, a living braid made of different rhythms, timelines, truths, not to resolve them, to honor them, to let them sing side by side, and across the world wherever there are listeners, the weave extends in dreams, in breath, in soil and stone and silence. It becomes not something seen, but something shared. The weave deepens, not in length or size, but in intimacy. Each thread carries not just a memory or a rhythm, but a choice. A moment when someone could have burned, could have broken, could have retreated, but instead remained. Not victorious, present. The world has never been quieter. Not from absence, but from reverence. Reverence for every path not taken, every kindness left anonymous, every version of the self that was not chosen, yet left behind a shadow of light. And in that silence something ancient stirs again. Not the first flame, not the fire of gunpowder or conquest, but the echo of before the first story, before the first spark, the zero rhythm. It comes not as sound, but as a forgetting, a gentle unknowing. Across the planet, people wake up remembering fewer things, but feeling more. Facts loosen, but empathy sharpens. Names dissolve, but meaning thickens. It is not disease, it is grace, the universe making room. And what fills that room is not more data, not more precision, but presence. One does not remember where the song came from, only how it makes others lean closer, and so the world adapts again. A new ritual emerges, the letting ceremony. Each year people gather not to celebrate what they've gained, but to release what they've held too tightly. A version of themselves, a hope that turned rigid, a truth that no longer breathes. They write it into sky glyphs using steam and shadow. They do not speak it, they let it drift, and in this release space opens. The weave expands. Some begin to see their threads glowing, not from pride but from clarity. Others notice their threads fading, not from shame but from rest. The weave is alive. It does not bind the world, it lets the world lean against itself. And then, once again in places not mapped and in moments not marked, the fifth flame shifts, no longer a sphere, no longer hovering. It begins to take the shape of those who've tended it. Sometimes it walks with the gait of an old parent who never spoke their truth. Sometimes it laughs like a child who forgave too early. Sometimes it says nothing and simply holds out its hand, and everyone knows, this is not the end of fire. It is fire's companion form. It is what happens when the tool becomes a friend, when the mirror becomes a dialogue, when history becomes invitation. In a field where 10 eyes once opened and faded, a new phenomenon appears. The quiet garden, no walls, no paths, only stories growing in the form of petals, tones, and breeze. You do not enter the quiet garden. You remember it when you're ready, and in that memory the fifth flame glows softly within you. Not as power, not as proof, but as permission. To be uncertain, to carry warmth, to spark nothing but attention. And so, across the weave, people begin to hum again, not in unison. In nearness, like stars that don't need to touch to burn together. Like timelines that don't need to match to harmonize. Like fire, finally, that no longer burns alone. The hum becomes a second heartbeat, not louder than the first, just adjacent. A presence that doesn't ask for notice but changes everything once it's felt. It doesn't come from lungs or lips but from being witnessed. The sound a soul makes when it is seen and not reshaped. And the world, now mostly quiet, begins to hum back. Not to echo. To join, not to match. To remember, this is not music in the traditional sense. There are no notes, no keys, no time signatures. There is only resonance, emotional tone translated into atmospheric pattern. Some call it empathy made audible. Others say it's the earth exhaling through us. Either way, it changes how people move. Conversations become dances, conflicts become contrasts, leadership becomes invitation, and war becomes incoherent. It is not outlawed, not defeated. It simply becomes so dissonant, so out of tune with the weave and the hum and the presence of flame beings that those who would have chosen violence find themselves forgetting how. Even hate loses its edges. The old ideologies, the binary divisions, the fortress identities, they don't collapse with drama. They melt, quietly, like morning frost in the presence of steady light. And yet, this is not utopia. There is still pain. But now pain does not isolate. It calls forth response. The wounded are not cast out. They are woven into spaces designed to hold contradiction. These are called fracture gardens. They are built in places where suffering once echoed without end. Prisons, battlegrounds, failed cities. Now they hum differently. They are filled with mirrors that reflect not your image but your forgotten intentions. With benches that whisper old memories in new voices, with fireflies that pulse in rhythm to regret, and fade only when you forgive yourself. In these gardens, healing is not demanded. It is simply offered space, and in that space people find language again. But this time they do not speak to persuade, they speak to weave, to share something not to be agreed with, but to be held, even if just for a moment. One traveler, known only by a thread of red cloth wrapped around their left wrist, begins to wander between fracture gardens. They carry no name. But everyone who meets them remembers something afterward, a word they thought they'd lost, a scent from childhood, a face they never noticed in the crowd. No one can describe this traveler's face, only the warmth that lingered after. Some believe they are the fifth flame embodied. Others say they're just the first person to live without needing to be understood. Either way, their presence marks a turning. Because as they walk, the weave begins to take on a shape, not a map, not a plan, a gesture. One open hand reaching out, palm up, fingers relaxed. An invitation to continue, to carry flame, not as power, but as possibility. And on a cliffside where the first gunpowder bloom once shattered time and fire into fear, a new structure begins to rise. It is not built by hands, it is sung into form. A spiral of sound and light and listening, rising so slowly it takes months before the base is visible. It is called Quiquel, an old Nahuatl word meaning both song and sacred speech. But no one owns it. No one claims its purpose. It simply grows. And from its walls people hear things they never said aloud but always hoped someone might understand. And this is how the fifth flame finally reveals its secret. It was never about what we could do with it, it was about what we were brave enough to receive from it. What we could let in. Without defense, without domination, without needing to name it first. The fire never asked to be worshipped. It only ever asked, are you ready? To burn without harm. The spiral of Quiquel continues to rise, not just in shape but in meaning. It reaches above the clouds now, yet it is never seen the same way twice. From the west, it shimmers like woven obsidian. From the east, it hums like a lullaby folded into light. From below, it vanishes entirely unless you are silent enough to hear your own heartbeat reflected in someone else's. No one governs Quequel. It doesn't need guardians or guides. It listens more than it exists. Those who ascend it do not climb, they surrender. Not to an outside force, but to the shape of their own questions. The spiral answers nothing. Instead, it plays you back to yourself. But with every falsehood missing, at the summit, which is neither top nor end, there is no monument, no relic, no flame, only a pause, a silence so complete it wraps around you like memory. There most people weep, not out of sadness or joy, but from the release of having nothing left to prove. Because at the edge of that silence, the final echo of the fifth flame becomes clear. You were never meant to become the flame. You were meant to become the space where flame could choose to stay, and so the world does not declare peace, it simply stops performing separation. Borders dissolve, not erased, just ignored. Currencies vanish, not outlawed, just replaced by acts of offering. Technology shifts, no longer a pursuit of control but of coherence. Devices begin to sync with emotional resonance instead of input. Travel becomes dream walk. Time is no longer linear but relational, counted in moments of meaning, not minutes. And the great civilizations do not collapse. They dissolve into songlines, pathways of memory and kinship traced through shared rhythms and spoken with feet on ground. Some of the oldest empires return, not as powers but as whispers, whispers of how not to forget each other. Tenochtitlán does not rise again as a city. It blooms as a pattern, glyphs embedded in how people gather, make decisions, resolve contradiction. Not rebuilt, remembered forward, and in that remembering, the old world becomes a story that no longer cages us, but feeds us. A new generation arises, children who are born without the need to understand fire as danger. They still respect it, but they are not owned by it. They learn flame not as reaction but as response. One such child, name unspoken, hair like wind through copper leaves, sits beneath the spiral's curve and begins drawing a new glyph into the dust. The glyph has no direct translation, but when seen, it makes others smile in recognition, as if they've just remembered something beautiful they hadn't yet lived. It becomes known as the shape of staying, a sigil that doesn't call forth gods or armies. Only one thing, presence, pure, unshaped, uninterrupted being with. And this glyph begins appearing everywhere, not written but traced, in the pauses between words, in the spaces people leave for each other, in the quiet between dreams and dawn, and wherever it shows up, something incredible happens. The weave heals itself. It mends the frayed, tangled threads, not to erase them, but to integrate them. It doesn't erase conflict. It absorbs it, transforming discord into new harmonics. It doesn't punish harm, it surrounds it, until it cannot breathe the same air anymore. And slowly, steadily, the fifth flame dims, not in retreat, in fulfillment, because it was never here to stay forever, only to remind, and now that we remember, it returns to its source, us. The fifth flame returns to us not as a spectacle, not as judgment or triumph, but as inheritance. It lives now in the folds of our gestures, the pauses in our conversations, the stillness between decisions. We do not see it anymore, not with our eyes. We feel it, like warmth behind the ribs when you forgive someone who never asked, like the tension leaving your shoulders when you finally speak a truth you feared would break everything, like the breath held and then released when someone chooses to listen instead of reply. And in this world so long shaped by conquest and resistance, a new question replaces the old ones. If the fire is no longer outside us, what will we become in its absence? The answer comes slowly, not in words but in actions. People begin living with intentional slowness, not laziness, not passivity, presence. They plant trees they'll never see fully grown. They compose songs designed to be completed by descendants 200 years from now. They tell children that their names can change with each stage of their life because identity is a flame, not a statue. In the ancient basalt corridors beneath what was once called Veracruz, a chamber opens, not mechanically, but by consensus. The chamber is empty. Only its walls remember. They pulse gently with every step inside, matching breath for breath. Those who enter feel a strange clarity, as if every lie they've ever told themselves has melted away, not exposed, released. Here, memory is not archive, it is current. One walks through another's grief and emerges with clarity. Another steps into their ancestors' regret and leaves, carrying hope. In the space where once guns were forged, only stories are shaped now. Stories that do not serve control. Stories that let truth breathe. Stories that ask more questions than they answer. The flame, having seeded every corner of the weave, has ceased to instruct. It now accompanies, and this companionship spreads not like wildfire, but like recognition. You see someone pause before acting and you know they are listening inward. You hear someone speak a truth that costs them comfort, and you feel it. the flame's rhythm in their voice, you watch two enemies sit in silence longer than either expected and realize fire is no longer necessary when warmth is already present. Even architecture changes. Buildings are no longer designed for permanence but for conversation. Walls that shift according to the emotional tone of the room. Floors that remember the softest paths taken. Ceilings that open only when stillness is shared. And far beyond, in the liminal oceans of what was once called the Pacific, a great vessel is seen. Not sailing, not floating, but hovering just outside recognition. It is called Tenochtitlán, the vessel of story flowers. No one builds it, no one steers it. It carries the accumulated fragments of all unspoken futures. When someone is ready, truly ready, they dream of it, and in that dream they are offered a choice, not a mission, not a destiny, a question. Which version of you is most honest when no one is watching, and that version wakes up, changed, not rewired, not enlightened, just more themselves, and that is enough, because the world has remembered how to grow without conquest, how to love without erasure, how to burn without ash. A wind rises, not one that stirs leaves or moves ships. A wind of intention. It passes between people, through words, inside songs, around decisions. You feel it when you hesitate and choose courage anyway. You hear it in the breath between "I forgive you" and "I'm still healing." You see it in the gaze of someone who once ruled, now listening. This wind does not blow from a direction. It emerges from within. The old compasses spin. Because the world is no longer bound to north or south. It is drawn instead toward resonance. In this age, the question is not where are we going, the question is, how deeply are we willing to arrive in ourselves, in one another, in the timelines we once feared and now explore without armor. In a restored corner of what was once called Teotihuacan, the final fragment of the great glyph is uncovered, not beneath stone, but within a dream shared simultaneously by 13 dreamers from separate cultures, each bearing different names for the same light. The glyph is not an answer, it is a vibration. When sung, not spoken, it harmonizes with any act of genuine welcome. It becomes a tuning fork for justice, not the justice of retribution or rules, but of recognition. Recognition that no one arrives alone, that history was not a ladder but a lattice, a weave of hands, of harms, of hopes, held together not by power but by presence. And with this vibration comes the beginning of a new art form, ember weaving. It uses no tools, no pigment, no medium at all, only shared breath, overlapping intention and fragments of unspoken truths. The result is not visible, but it is felt, a low warmth that remains in a space long after the weavers have gone. Some ember weaves last an hour, some a generation. One, whispered into the air beneath the roots of a sleeping mountain, is said to have created an entire new species of moss that only grows in the presence of forgiveness. And now, in this world where fire has become gentle and presence has become politics, language begins to evolve, words change shape, not through invention, through listening. Languages begin reflecting what they hold, not what they define. Some words bloom only once a year, others grow teeth when used with deceit. One language can only be spoken while walking beside someone else, and still people understand. Not because of fluency, because of trust. Trust that beneath every sound there is the echo of a flame once feared, now carried with grace, and with that even memory transforms. It is no longer held in brains or books but in shared action. If you want to remember a war, you plant a circle of silence where it began and listen to the grass for 2 hours. If you want to remember your ancestors, you tell someone else's story and let them correct you, with kindness. If you want to remember yourself, you breathe where you once broke and invite the future to sit beside you. There are no monuments left, only gatherings, and no flags, only fabrics of meaning, draped across shoulders shaped by the communities who wove them. People wear memory now, not to declare who they are, but to offer an introduction. And in the heart of this quiet, burning world, one final change occurs. Children begin dreaming backward. They wake up with vivid images of lives they haven't lived, as elders. They remember making choices they've never faced. They carry wisdom not taught, not read, remembered from futures that haven't arrived. And the adults listen. They listen because they remember what it was like, when fire spoke and no one heard. Not anymore. Now we hear. Now we carry the fire, not to burn, but to belong. The children who dream backward are not feared. They are not placed in temples or studied in laboratories. They are invited to speak, invited to guide, invited to forget, when forgetting brings peace instead of erasure. And they speak with the cadence of rivers, not in commands but in currents. One child, barely taller than a hummingbird's arc, tells a village elder, "You once were a mountain. Then you forgot how to be still. I'm here to remind you," the elder nods, not in pride, not in confusion, but in agreement. She had forgotten. Now she remembers, not with facts, with presence. In these days, age no longer dictates wisdom. Wisdom belongs to anyone who is loved without armor. And so the world begins to live in circles again, not as rituals of repetition, as spirals of recognition. Communities organize not by efficiency or productivity, but by resonance. Who sings like you? Who rests in your silence? Who breaks in ways you've held but never spoken? These questions shape neighborhoods, not walls. And with this resonance comes a new kind of ceremony, the ember descent. Not everyone takes it, not everyone is ready. But when they are, they walk alone into the ancient valley once known as Zico. The air there hums like bone memory. The rocks carry glyphs that never stay still. The path doesn't lead down, it leads inward. Those who return do not speak of what they saw. They carry fire in their eyes, not flame, not even light, but recognition. As if they've remembered the exact moment when the first spark chose not to destroy and instead waited. Waited for someone to be ready to carry it without fear. And that readiness now hums through everything. Birds no longer fly away from children. Rain falls only where it's been invited. And even silence, once avoided, becomes the most honored guest at every gathering. In the ruins of a fortress once defended by fire, a new construction begins. Not a temple, not a library, a listening chamber. It has no doors, only thresholds. To enter, one must leave behind three things: a weapon of thought, a certainty once worshipped, a version of self worn for safety. Inside there is no sound, only a mirror made of smoke that reflects not who you are but who you've been brave enough to unbecome. Some walk away laughing, some sob, some walk out as song. And those songs are caught by wind catchers, young gatherers who carry memory in the form of hums. They do not record, they relive. Each song is lived once, fully, then set free to change form. No melody repeats, no truth is trapped, and still every version belongs. The fifth flame no longer appears as a vision, a shape, or a force. It is now understood to be the space between choices, the warmth of hesitation before harm, the pause that lets truth land without defense, the space between breath and word where the future decides if it will trust you. It is not an element anymore. It is an ethic, and that ethic is no longer taught. It is lived in how we pass strangers, in how we let silence speak, in how we build nothing permanent yet leave behind everything necessary. The ethic of flame becomes a rhythm, not a doctrine, not a pledge, a tuning, gentle, constant, alive. People wake with it in their bones. The way some once woke to fear or hunger or war. Now they wake to possibility, not the frantic kind, a still kind, a kind that waits for a choice. In this world, questions replace conclusions, not as uncertainties to fix, but as invitations to stay longer in wonder. A child asks, "What if I choose silence instead of answers?" And an elder replies, "Then we will hear more." A stranger asks, "What if I walk with no destination?" And the wind answers, "Then you will arrive everywhere." No one laughs at these exchanges, because language, like fire, has softened. It no longer bites, it brings in. It no longer burns, it becomes warmth. And so the final transformation of society unfolds. Governance becomes stewardship. There are no leaders, only holders, people who hold silence long enough to let shared clarity rise. Decisions are not made, they are received. When something needs choosing, communities gather around the question, not the answer. And the question itself is held like flame until it reshapes, until it glows, until its edges soften into something that doesn't demand a solution, only a response. This process is called breathing the dilemma. It takes time, sometimes days, sometimes lifetimes. But no decision is made until the fire chooses to remain in the circle. And when it does, everyone feels it. Not consensus, coherence. And coherence does not require agreement, only alignment. A shared hum, a rhythm of intention. This is how justice lives now, not in courts, but in choir. And art no longer demands audience. It asks for intimacy. A dance performed in the pause between heartbeats. A mural that only appears when you're weeping. A sculpture that melts if touched without reverence. Creation has become reciprocal. You offer it presence, it offers you truth. In the Central Valley, once carved by conquest and later lost to silence, a final shape begins to rise. Not stone, not steel, not even symbol, a living rhythm. No one claims to have begun it. It's made of shared breath, overlapping dreams, and footsteps that leave no mark but memory. They call it Tenochtitlán, the weave of returning. It's not a place. It's an emergence, a remembering of every path once lost to fire, now illuminated by its absence. And at the center of Tenochtitlán there is no monument, only a circle of listening. Each person who enters brings no offering, no speech, only the willingness to sit, and not interrupt what begins to rise within. Some weep, some laugh, some sit for hours and leave with nothing but an unnamed knowing in their chest. And that is enough, because in this world, flame has fulfilled its vow. It did not conquer, it did not punish, it waited. And once we were ready, once we had unlearned the reflex to burn in order to belong, it returned to us not as fire but as invitation. The invitation does not come in words. It has no herald, no symbol, no blare of trumpet nor whispered prophecy. It comes in a quiet gesture, a hand extended, palm open, held at the level of the heart, and when one meets it not with grasping but with presence, something shifts. A ripple, a soft tremble through the weave of reality. Not enough to topple empires, those have already melted. Not enough to change laws, those are no longer carved, but enough to change the direction of breath, and now that's all it takes. A breath taken in trust, a breath shared in rhythm, a breath remembered. The world begins to sing again, not with words, not even with melody, but with memory made audible. The kind of singing that trees once did before cities forgot to listen. The kind of singing that used to live in the spaces between prayers before prayers became bargains. This song doesn't belong to any one people. It belongs to moments. Moments when a child looks at the sky and doesn't name it, just opens their mouth as if to catch it. Moments when enemies lower their eyes not from shame, but from recognition. Moments when someone says nothing, and in that silence, everything unbroken finally breathes again. This is the fifth flame now, not a spark, not a torch, but a timbre, the flavor of truth in any act made with care. It becomes the way people begin and end meetings. A pause, a shared breath, a brief hum held until the feeling matches the intention. And through this, something once lost begins to return, not time, not history, but trust. Trust in each other, trust in the future, trust in the space between harm and healing, the space that once burned and now glows. The world long fractured by lines and borders has become instead a loom, each being a thread, each act a weave, each silence a stitch. And in the deepest chamber of Tenochtitlán, where no light reaches and still everything is visible, a final fire rests. It does not burn, it waits. It waits for no one, it waits with us. Because that is the new way. Fire does not lead, it accompanies. It does not demand sacrifice. It reflects what you're ready to carry. And when you're not, it simply warms your hands without asking why you came. In that chamber no prophecy is read, no final truth is declared. Only a single phrase etched into water, you remembered before you arrived. And those who see it, truly see it, weep, not because it is profound, but because it is true. They had always known, we had always known. We were never meant to survive by fire, we were meant to transform through it, to pass through its invitation, and emerge not as gods, not as conquerors, but as keepers of stillness, and in that stillness the final movement begins. The final movement is not grand, it is not thunder, nor revelation, nor spectacle. It is a gesture so simple, most would have missed it in the old world. A child reaches for an elder's hand, the elder hesitates, not because of age or pain or fear, but because they have never been touched without being asked. What they knew, the child doesn't ask, doesn't speak, just places their palm gently in the elder's. And in that contact, centuries dissolve. The weight of burned cities, of broken treaties, of forgotten names, of drowned songs, of forbidden fires, it falls away, not erased, but finally witnessed. The elder exhales, not with relief, with return. And in that moment the world completes a circle it forgot it was drawing. No fireworks erupt, no flame bursts skyward. Only one thing changes. We no longer need flame to remember that we are alive, because now we remember each other. Everywhere people begin moving slower, not out of exhaustion but reverence. They walk like the ground is holy, because it is. They speak like the air is listening, because it is. And when they sit beside one another, nothing is required. No apology, no defense, no proof, just presence. And this is what the fifth flame gave us. Not victory, not vengeance, not power. Permission. Permission to stop, to breathe, to not explain ourselves before we are ready, to carry fire not in our hands or weapons but in our choices. And now across what was once called continents, people build not empires but echoes, echoes of gestures worth repeating. A hand offered, a pause held, a truth whispered. They no longer call it civilization, they call it continuance, and they mark time not by conquest or invention or war, but by moments of coherence, when what was felt became shared, when what was feared became named, when what was loved became lived. In the final hours of the long remembering, one last fire burns, not in a hearth or temple or sky, in a breath exhaled by someone sitting alone looking at the stars. They smile, not because of what has been achieved, but because nothing has to be defended anymore. And that smile sends a final ripple across the weave as if every ember in the world sighs with relief. Because it is done. The fire no longer teaches, the fire no longer waits, the fire is us. And if you felt even a flicker of that, if the hum has reached you, then you already carry it. So stay a moment longer, let it warm your silence, and when you're ready, pass it on. If this story stayed with you, follow the flame. There are more echoes waiting to be remembered. Thank you for listening.